Je vais pas ajouter autre chose pour l'instant. Sinon, une fois de plus, un grand merci. Et un grand merci aussi aux interlocuteurs avec lesquels j'ai travaillé le plus souvent ces derniers mois et qui ont accepté une communication de ma part parfois un tout petit peu intermittente, étant donné qu'on était aux prises avec des blocages et d'autres négociations d'ordre varié avec la préfecture de police. Merci à tout le monde d'être là et merci à vous d'ouvrir les travaux cet après-midi.
J'ai choisi de parler français. Je m'excuse, mon français n'est pas parfait, au contraire. Donc, je lirai un bref texte de remerciement. Et je voudrais dire quelque chose à propos de notre méthode de travail. Donc, je désire remercier l'Université Sorbonne Nouvelle qui a accepté de collaborer avec nous et qui nous accueille. Un grand merci en particulier à Guido Furci qui a beaucoup fait pour cette initiative, pour que cette initiative puisse démarrer. Je partage l'honneur d'introduire les travaux donc, avec mon ami et collègue Gianni Maffei qui est là. Il y a 4 ans, nous avons créé, Gianni Maffei et moi, nous avons inventé un séminaire permanent de narratologie, séminaire permanent de narratologie. Le séminaire s'est déjà réuni officiellement 4 fois à partir de l'an 2020. Donc, c'est la 5e rencontre après moins de 4 ans de travaux. C'est beaucoup, peut-être c'est trop. Peut-être qu'on a trop travaillé. Je voudrais vous parler brièvement de nos intentions et de notre approche à la narratologie. En Italie, la pensée narratologique avait vécu une véritable crise après une importante expansion qui se colloque à peu près entre 1965 et 1985. La pensée et la méthode structuraliste d'abord et ensuite la vague sémiotique avaient obtenu des importantes acquisitions théoriques et même pratiques. Je me borne à rappeler l'ouvrage de Cesare Segre ainsi que les écrits de Umberto Eco, évidemment. Il y a 20 ou même 10 ans, la seule narratologie italienne était une narratologie textualiste qui descendait directement de l'œuvre de Gérard Genette. La narratologie post-classique et cognitiviste n'était ni connue ni fréquentée. Donc, notre association essaie de soutenir des recherches qui puissent moderniser l'horizon scientifique italien grâce notamment à un groupe de jeunes chercheurs. Je rappelle surtout Filippo Pagnuc, Filippo Pennacchio, qui ont contribué à l'organisation de ce colloque, mais aussi à beaucoup d'autres qui, dans les universités italiennes, sont intéressés à un renouvellement disciplinaire. Demain, on aura même l'occasion d'écouter une relation ayant pour sujet les jeux vidéo préparés par un groupe. C'est là-bas, de mes élèves du premier an d'un master en cinéma, télévision et new media. Une question un peu ridicule, un peu drôle. Existe-t-il une voie italienne à la narratologie? Peut-être la question est immodeste, peut-être visible, étant donné les difficultés que j'ai mentionnées. J'essaierai quand même de suggérer une idée très générale. En Italie, les débats sur les formes de la narration, même sur certaines données tirées du cognitivisme, sont profondément conditionnés par une tradition historiciste. Et il faut cependant signaler que le mot français historicisme n'est pas parfaitement synonyme d'historicisme. Peut-être. Ok. En principe, la narratologie suggère l'existence de quelques lois transhistoriques, c'est-à-dire la permanence de certaines manières de raconter qui ne sont pas soumises à une véritable évolution, ou bien seulement à une transformation très lente. Au contraire, en Italie, le facteur historique quelquefois micro-historiques, jouent un rôle décisif quant à la compréhension des textes. On s'efforce toujours chez nous de coloquer l'œuvre à l'intérieur d'un système de relations sociales, en contact avec ce que les formalistes russes appelaient hein, la vie quotidienne. Et j'ose dire, notre narratologie fait souvent recours à la notion, à l'instance du lecteur, et notamment du lecteur implicite, lettore implicito, qui peut constituer un facteur de renforcement du paradigme historiciste. Je me réfère toujours à l'implicité leser de Wolfgang Iser, et tout ça, je le sais, donc lecteur implicite, lecteur implicite leser, selon la définition de Wolfgang Iser, tout ça, je le sais, peut constituer un problème, bien sûr. J'ai discuté, par exemple, avec Françoise Avocat, qui me reprochait un excès d'emphase sur le rôle de l'implied reader. Implied reader. Ce n'est pas par hasard que j'ai employé 4 langues pour signifier un concept énormément problématique. Toutefois, je me risque à prétendre que cette relativisation contextualiste puisse permettre à la narratologie italienne d'accepter les implications d'une manière cognitiviste de concevoir l'expérience narrative. Le texte n'est pas seul, n'est pas isolé, il est au centre d'un réseau de relations perceptives qui le fondent, qui, pour ainsi dire, le déterminent. Ce n'est qu'une suggestion, évidemment, qui peut être ou peut apparaître importante si l'on réfléchit sur la nature nécessairement historique de la métalepse et sur sa réactivité aux compétences des lecteurs et des spectateurs. Je voudrais affirmer en exagérant que la métalepse n'existe que quand on parvient à en amorcer une caractérisation dialectique. Et c'est exactement de cela qu'on doit discuter pendant ces 3 jours. Je m'arrête, j'ai trop parlé, j'ai mal parlé. Je voudrais passer la parole à Gianni Maffei.
Abbiamo cambiato il programma.
Tu ne parles
No, parlo dopo.
Ah, ok.
È vero, parlo dopo, così tiro anche un po' di rilancio verso il futuro. Je relance.
Okay. Ok. Merci beaucoup Paolo et Guido pour avoir brisé la glace. Mais en tout cas, c'est un honneur de commencer cette journée, de présenter les trois speakers d'aujourd'hui, de cet après-midi de colloque. Et je voudrais remercier surtout Guido pour avoir organisé ce colloque de façon impeccable spécialement pendant les derniers jours. Je l'ai vu comment il a bossé pour faire en sorte qu'on puisse en fait être là et parler de Métalepse. Et Paolo Giovanni aussi pour avoir introduit déjà des problèmes, des questions qu'on va rencontrer dans ces jours-ci, c'est-à-dire cette idée d'une voix italien dans la Métalepse, et surtout j'ai apprécié l'idée de commencer un discours qui oppose, dans une certaine façon, une approche diachronique, une approche synchronique aussi. Mais enough with that. C'est un honneur aussi de présenter professeur John Peer. Il est professeur d'anglais retraité de l'Université de Tours, membre statutaire du CRAL, CNRS et HSS. Il co-dirige au sein de ce centre le séminaire Recherche contemporaine en narratologie depuis 2003 et le co-rédacteur de la collection Narratologie chez De Gruyter. Il est aussi cofondateur en 2009 de l'European Narratology Network dont il fut président de 2013 à 2015. Il est l'auteur de nombreux articles scientifiques et chapitres de livres et directeur ou co-directeur de plus de 15 ouvrages collectifs dont Métalepse, une torse au pacte de la représentation de 2005, Théorie du récit, la porte de la recherche allemande, 2005 aussi, Theorizing Narrativity, 2008, Narratologie contemporaine, du 2010, un Handbook of Narratology 2009 et 2014, et puis d'autres livres aussi sur la narratologie, Jan Modorowski, le formalisme russe, et plus récemment, Handbook of Diachronic Narratology. So that ties in with all of the things.
Qui doit apparaître au mois de juillet.
Ah oui, ouais. Super. Donc, on va peut-être avoir un petit aperçu de ce qu'on va trouver dans le handbook. A bit of a sneak preview of the handbook.
Ce que je dis aujourd'hui, non, c'est complètement indépendant de ce que j'ai fait une contribution sur la mise en abîme.
Super.
Les mise en abîme ne sont pas tout à fait là.
Donc, le titre de sa contribution, c'est Schéma de la recherche sur la métalepse.
Oui.
Donc, je cède la parole à Jean-Pierre. Thank you.
Mais je vous remercie tous de m'avoir invité. C'est un grand honneur et un plaisir d'être ici, de parler à propos de la connaissance de la métalepse. Alors, rarement dans l'histoire de la poétique et de la théorie littéraire, a-t-on identifié une technique ou un procédé présenté en si peu de lignes, moins de 3 pages, aussi fécond et retentissant que celui de la métalepse narrative, avancée par Gérard Genette en 1972. Les grandes lignes de la métalepse narrative sont connues. Voilà. Voilà, je ne vais pas la relire, vous la connaissez tous, je pense. Mais les deux passages sont très souvent cités. Ah, c'est bien ces deux pages. Je voudrais en ajouter un autre, trouvé dans une note en bas de page, rarement cité par les commentateurs. Métalepse fait ici système avec prolepse, analepse, silepse et paralepse, avec le genre spécifique de prendre, raconter en changeant de niveau. En 2009, Werner Wolf a observé qu'il n'existait aucune définition généralement acceptée de la métalepse. Il en va de même aujourd'hui, malgré ou plutôt à cause des nombreuses études qui lui ont été consacrées. Plus important, me semble-t-il, est le fait que les problématiques fondamentales du procédé ont été identifiées par Genette dès 1972 et que les grandes lignes de l'argument restent incontournables aujourd'hui pour toute question narratologique de la transgression métaleptique. Genette lui-même réitère ces principes quelques années plus tard lorsque dans Nouveau discours de récit, en décrivant la métalepse comme transgression délibérée du seuil d'enchâssement, par lequel l'auteur ou son lecteur s'introduit dans la fiction de son récit ou qu'un personnage s'unisse dans l'existence extra-diégétique de l'auteur. Il observe qu'un trouble est jeté dans la distinction des niveaux. La métalepse serait donc bien plus qu'une simple ambiguïté technique au sein de la structure du récit. Elle fonctionne comme une figure de l'imagination créatrice. En 2004, plus de 30 ans après ses premières remarques concernant la métalepse, période pendant laquelle les discussions à propos du procédé restaient plus ou moins au sommeil, Genette, suite au colloque international La métalepse aujourd'hui, qui s'est tenu en 2002, a publié un ouvrage intitulé Métalepse de la figure à la fiction. Il nous rappelle que la métalepse, figure rhétorique qui opère un transfert de sens, est un cas particulier de la métonymie, une figure par substitution par laquelle on explique ce qui suit pour faire entendre ce qui précède, ou ce qui procède pour faire entendre ce qui suit, selon Dumarsais, ou qui, selon Montagnier, consiste à substituer l'expression indirecte à l'expression directe, voire à donner la cause pour l'effet et l'effet pour la cause. L'apport de Genette, et ceci est capital pour la suite des travaux consacrés à la métalepse, et d'avoir transformé la métalepse de l'auteur en métalepse narrative par le biais de la transgression délibérée du seuil d'entassement du niveau narratif. Une autre innovation importante de cet ouvrage est d'avoir souligné le lien entre figure et fiction, deux termes dérivés du verbe latin fingere, façonner, représenter, feindre, inventer. La figure, précise Genette, est un embryon, ou si l'on préfère, une esquisse de fiction. Grâce à ce rapprochement, la fiction serait un mode élargi de la figure. Par ailleurs, la métalepse ne serait donc plus une simple figure traduisible, mais bien une fiction à part entière. Genette s'interroge sur un certain nombre d'extensions progressives de cette idée, et il avance la thèse, qui suscitera par la suite de quelques controverses, qu'une fiction n'est en somme qu'une figure prise à la lettre et traitée comme un événement effectif. L'ouvrage s'intéresse ensuite à quelques cas de métalepse fictivement littéralisés, pris au sérieux, mettant à mal la suspension volontaire d'incrédulité de Coleridge pour favoriser, comme dans les fictions de type fantastique ou merveilleux, une simulation ludique de crédulité. Conçues ainsi, les fictions sont par nature métaleptiques. La présence, oui. Voilà. D'accord. On voit mieux, d'accord. Bon, alors, conçues ainsi, les fictions sont par nature métaleptiques. La présence de Napoléon dans une œuvre de fiction traduit une transfusion perpétuelle et réciproque de la diégèse réelle à la diégèse fictionnelle et d'une fiction à une autre, l'âme même de la fiction en général et de toute fiction en particulier. Toute fiction, conclut Genette, est tissée de métalepse. Alors, armé de cette conception élargie, l'auteur passe dans la suite de son livre au rôle de la métalepse au-delà de l'art narratif, théâtre, cinéma, télévision, peinture, photographie. Le métalepse, donc, rhétorique au début, narrative ensuite, et maintenant transmédia. So, le métalepse s'ouvre maintenant au vaste champ de ces manifestations transmédia. On voit que la distance parcourue entre 1972 et 2004 est considérable, comme Françoise l'avocat l'a montré dans son article, et Genette inventa la métalepse. Tandis que le récit, texte emblématique de la narratologie, le récit est présenté comme l'expansion d'un verbe. Les énoncés comme « je marche » ou « Pierre devint écrivain » sont des formes minimales du récit. L'analyse du récit passe par des catégories empruntées à la grammaire du verbe. À cette époque de la narratologie, la métalepse, une sorte de graine de sable jetée dans le fonctionnement de la logique narrative, incompatible avec le paradigme structuraliste, n'attirait pas beaucoup d'attention. Comme l'a fait remarquer Julian Hanebeck, c'est une structure narrative qui, par définition, nie ses propres prémices. Dans l'ouvrage de 2004, par contraste, l'accent tombe non pas sur le récit en tant que tel, mais la structure narrative, mais sur la figure, et notamment la métalepse, qui se prête aux littéralisations métaleptiques à l'œuvre dans le processus de fictionnalisation. Et ceci, non seulement dans les récits littéraires. Comme Genette me l'a dit en marge de la publication de Métalepse, je cite, La notion de récit minimal est bien d'ordre narratologique. Qu'une figure puisse être décrite comme l'embryon d'une fiction, c'est une notion d'un tout autre ordre. Une métaphore, Achille est un lion, si on la prend à la lettre, constitue évidemment une petite fiction. Dans leur ensemble, ces évolutions dans la réflexion de Genève touchent de près ou de loin aux principaux aspects de la métalepse, sa dimension rhétorique, son investissement narratif, ses élargissements transmédiaux, sa diachronicité et ses rapports à la fictionnalité, laissant à la recherche postérieure la tâche d'explorer les nombreuses manifestations et enjeux de procédés si vieux, mais si récemment identifiés comme tels. C'est dans le contexte de ce colloque international, la métalepse aujourd'hui, tenu en 2002, dont les actes ont paru 3 ans plus tard. Rétrospectivement, cet événement s'est révélé comme une sorte de catalyseur d'idées et de tendances qui étaient dans l'air à l'époque, mais qui n'avaient pas encore été rassemblées ou clairement formulées. Les contributions incluses dans Métalepse, dans ce pacte de communication, s'adressent pour la pacte de la représentation, pardon, s'adresse pour la plupart à des questions de narratologie, à la définition formelle du procédé et aux multiples modalités de transgression ou de violation paradoxale des niveaux. Les arts visuels, peinture et cinéma, sont également pris en compte, ainsi que la perspective diachronique, l'histoire rhétorique de la métalepse, sa présence dans les actes de l'apôtre et chez les formalistes russes. Il ne sort pourtant aucun paradigme commun de ces travaux. Tel n'a pas été l'objectif dans cette publication exploratoire. Mais il a été possible néanmoins de dégager quelques tendances ou affinités entre les différentes positions adoptées. Ceci a permis de regrouper les contributions de façon informelle. La première partie est intitulée « Métalepse rhétorique » et elle est subdivisée en figures et communication. La deuxième partie du livre est intitulée « Métalepse ontologique » et elle est subdivisée en réflexivité et représentation. Ce schéma ne constitue guère une feuille de route pour les recherches au fil des années suivantes, mais elle a bien ouvert des perspectives potentielles et souvent fructueuses sur les questions débattues par la suite. Significativement, ces questions engagent des enjeux qui ne sont pas limités à la métalepse strictement parlante. Il y a beaucoup d'effets, le métalepse ouvre beaucoup de questions sur d'autres aspects du récit qui ne sont pas proprement métaleptiques. Donc, en empruntant quelques chemins de la recherche sur la métalepse, je ne tenterai pas, dans un simple exposé oral, de faire un tableau ou de dresser un bilan des nombreux courants de réflexion sur la question. Les publications sont trop nombreuses, les tendances sont trop variées. Ce que je propose, c'est d'examiner brièvement quelques aspects éthiques de la conceptualisation du récit. Alors, la métalepse, un marque de fictionnalité, n'existe que dans les œuvres de représentation verbale ou visuelle. C'est Marilyn Ryan, dans son article Logique culturelle de la métalepse, dans la collection que j'ai citée, qui a mis en place le modèle le plus répandu et influent. J'exposerai ce modèle dans ses grandes lignes avant de passer à quelques commentaires. Ryan fait remarquer qu'il existe chez Genève 2 types de métalepse, sans être clairement distingués l'un de l'autre. Tout d'abord, de la métalepse rhétorique, qui permet à un niveau diégétique de faire intrusion dans un autre niveau, mais l'opération n'a rien de contaminant car elle respecte la différence des niveaux. Elle ouvre une petite fenêtre sur un autre monde, mais elle la ferme aussitôt. La métalepse ontologique, par contre, est plus qu'un clin d'œil furtif qui perce le niveau. C'est un passage logiquement interdit, une transgression qui permet l'interpénétration de deux domaines censés rester distincts. Cette opération remet radicalement en question la frontière entre l'imaginaire et le réel. Ryan précise que la métalepse ontologique renvoie aux travaux de Brian McHale sur la fiction postmoderne, un ouvrage très connu de 1987, qui s'inspire du livre de Douglas Hofstadter, Gödel, Escher-Bach, où les phénomènes des boucles étranges et des hiérarchies enchevêtrées sont présentés. Et elle poursuit, alors que, je cite, alors que la métalepse rhétorique présente un acte de communication entre deux membres du même monde au sujet de membres d'un autre monde, la métalepse ontologique met en scène une action dont les participants appartiennent à deux domaines distincts. Elle précise que la distinction entre les deux types de métalepse repose sur l'analogie entre la hiérarchie de niveaux dans les sciences informatiques, construite selon le principe du stack ou de la pile, et celle des niveaux narratifs en narratologie. En bas de la pile se trouve le monde actuel, celui de l'auteur et du lecteur. Au niveau suivant est le monde fictionnel 1, avec son narrateur et son narrateur, et ainsi de suite pour les deuxième, troisième et quatrième niveaux. Donc c'est de bas en haut. L'autre élément de base du modèle fourni par Ryan concerne le paradoxe logique qui caractérise la métalepse, particulièrement dans son versant ontologique. C'est à ce niveau que le procédé opère une fusion de mondes possibles qui constitue une infraction à la logique. La logique en question est celle de l'autoréférentialité, identifiée par Épiménide, qui a parlé du paradoxe du menteur, et reprise au siècle dernier sous la forme du théorème de Gödel, dont la logique, selon Ryan, se rapporte de celle de la machine de Turing, l'ordinateur. Chez Ryan, la métalepse sous ces deux formats, rhétorique et ontologique, est donc modelée selon les principes de l'informatique et de ceux de la logique de l'autoréférentialité. Mais il est important de noter que l'article en question est effectivement la prolongation du livre de 1991, Possible Worlds, Artificial Intelligence, Narrative Theory, et plus particulièrement du chapitre dans ce livre, Stacks, Frames and Boundaries, or Narrative as Computer Language. Ici, le système narratologique sur lequel le modèle de métalepse repose est exposé. Sauf que dans ce livre de 1991, le mot métalepse ne paraît pas. Le chapitre examine le rôle des frontières, boundaries, dans l'enchâssement narratif, framing, embedding, etc., à la lumière de l'intelligence artificielle, faisant état de la distinction entre histoire et discours en narratologie. Ryan discerne deux types de frontières ontologiques et frontières illocutoires. Les frontières ontologiques, au niveau de l'histoire, délimitent des domaines au sein de l'univers sémantique. Et le fait de les traverser représente un recentrage dans un nouveau système. Quant aux frontières illocutoires, au niveau du discours, elles délimitent les actes de langage au sein d'un texte ou d'une conversation. Et le fait de les traverser introduit un nouveau locuteur ou un nouveau narrateur. L'analogie entre le récit et le langage informatique est étudiée systématiquement afin d'identifier les différentes manières dont les frontières narratives sont traversées dans ce que Ryan appelle le récit canonique. Hein. Donc, le pile narratif qu'il a écrit, c'est le récit logique, la forme du récit canonique. Mais ici, le protocole des opérations permis est limité et restreint. Mais elle explore aussi, dans cet article aussi, quelques instances de subversion du système où une posture anti-narrative est adoptée. Parmi les violations des frontières sont, par exemple, les boucles étranges de Starter, la contamination des niveaux, les paradoxes ontologiques et la suppression des frontières. Des phénomènes qui seront traités plus tard dans l'article sur la métalepse. Donc, elle a créé cet article de 1991, elle a créé le système sur lequel sa théorie de la métalepse sera développée 14 ans plus tard. Pourtant, il existe deux différences importantes entre ces deux textes. À première vue, négligeable. Le premier texte n'emploie pas le mot métalepse et on n'y trouve nulle part l'expression métalepse rhétorique. Il est consacré à deux types de frontières, une élocutoire, l'autre ontologique. Ces constats méritent, donc dans l'article plus tard, elle parle de métalepse rhétorique et métalepse ontologique. Dans le livre d'autres, c'était frontières élocutoires et ontologiques. Alors, ces constats méritent quelques commentaires. Il est frappant que dans la logique culture de la métalepse, l'auteur évoque l'étymologie du mot métalepse, mais il ne fait aucune allusion à ses origines dans la rhétorique, figure par laquelle un transfert de sens est opéré. Il semblerait donc que la dimension proprement rhétorique du procédé de métalepse, au sens où Genette l'a introduit, n'est pas prise en compte. Cela a des conséquences pour l'étude diachronique de la métalepse, comme les spécialistes de littérature ancienne le reconnaissent, Thomas par exemple, qui dirige avec Martin Hammer un très beau projet consacré à la métalepse historique. Hein. Donc, on ne trouve pas chez Ryan la base d'une narratologie diachronique ou historique. Alors, quant à l'expression élocutoire, il est emprunté à la théorie des actes de langage élaborée par John Austin et John Searle. Dans cette théorie, on parle d'acte élocutoire. C'est un acte qui consiste à dire quelque chose sans mettre l'accent sur ce qui est dit. Un acte élocutoire, c'est affirmer, promettre, saluer, etc., mais aussi l'acte de raconter. En effet, lorsque Ryan postule une frontière élocutoire dans son chapitre de 1991, elle introduit au sein de sa théorie narrative la dimension pragmatique du discours. Quant à la frontière ontologique, elle correspond à la dimension sémantique du récit. Dans l'article de Ryan de 2005, par contre, on lit, je cite, alors que la métalepse rhétorique présente un acte de communication entre deux membres du même monde au sujet d'un membre d'un autre monde, la métalepse ontologique met en scène une action dont les participants appartiennent à deux domaines distincts. Bref, l'élocutoire, en 2005, disparaît au profit de la métalepse rhétorique. Il est frappant de constater que Genette, dans son livre de fiction et diction, et paru la même année que le livre de Ryan, inclut un chapitre intitulé « Les actes de fiction ». Ce chapitre examine l'acte élocutoire. Il débute ainsi. J'entends ici par acte de fiction les énoncés de fiction narrative considérés comme actes de langage, speech acts. Je reviens donc sur la question du statut élocutoire de la fiction narrative, qui me semble un peu vite tranchée négativement par un article décisif à bien des égards. Bon, il s'agit de l'article de John Searle, le statut logique du discours de la fiction. Alors, en contestant la coextension supposée entre littérature et fiction, Genève défend une définition illocutoire de fiction. Le discours de fiction, selon lui, est un patchwork ou un amalgame plus ou moins homogénéisé d'éléments hétéroclites empruntés pour la plupart à la réalité. Les énoncés intentionnellement fictionnels, dit-il, sont à considérer comme des assertions non sérieuses ou non littérales qui recouvrent sur le mode de l'acte de langage indirect ou de la figure, je répète, possède la capacité à faire entendre plus, moins ou autre chose qu'il ne le dit. Pour illustrer ces propos, Genève fournit l'exemple suivant. Le chêne, un jour, dit au roseau. Dans cet énoncé, le mot chêne est à comprendre comme métaphore d'une personne d'apparence robuste, et le mot roseau comme métaphore d'une personne d'apparence frêle. On voit que les deux métaphores, figure par substitution ou changement de sens, sont doublées par la nature illocutoire du discours de fiction. Ici, le fiction rejoint la figure. Ceci nous ramène à la phrase que j'ai déjà citée, selon laquelle la figure est un embryon, ou si l'on préfère, l'esquisse de fiction. Donc, il a fait ici une distinction entre récit et fiction. Souvent, on dit fiction, on pense littérature. Mais lui, il fait la distinction. Et la littérature est, enfin, le récit possède l'acte de raconter de un acte illocutoire. Enfin, et ceci est important, les discours de fiction comme acte illocutoire conduisent Genève à considérer la métalepse comme une gradation, c'est important, une gradation entre deux états. Celui purement formel et sémantiquement faible, du simple schéma verbal, qu'on ne tient pour figure qu'au nom de sa structure identifiable et canonique. Et celui sémantiquement fort qui opère un prodige par effet d'un transfert de sens. Bref, la métalepse se décline en deux formes ou degrés, l'une sémantiquement faible, l'autre sémantiquement forte. On aura sans doute constaté un certain parallèle entre le cadre figural ou sémantico-illocutoire de la métalepse chez Genève et le cadre ontologique chez Ryan. Mais il y a une différence fondamentale entre les deux modèles dans la mesure où le modèle de Ryan est fondé non sur une gradation, mais sur des distinctions catégorielles. C'est une différence importante. Des métalepses rhétoriques ouvrant petite fenêtre sur un autre monde, vite refermé, et des métalepses ontologiques, passage logiquement interdit entre deux domaines censés rester distincts. Ryan fait une distinction catégorielle entre ces deux. En gros, on peut dire que chez l'un, le procédé est indissolublement lié au discours narratif comme acte illocutoire, tandis que chez l'autre, c'est le statut ontologique des mondes narratifs qui est mis en valeur. Mais il me semble qu'on peut aller plus loin. À la lumière des évolutions récentes, mais aussi moins récentes, des recherches concernant la métalepse, il est aujourd'hui possible de discerner deux tendances générales, à mon avis. L'une mettant l'accent sur l'illocutoire, l'autre sur l'ontologique. Ces tendances sont identifiables et elles méritent d'être approfondies. Une des conclusions des tirées de mes lectures, dont quelques-unes sont listées sur la bibliographie sur laquelle j'ai distribué. J'aimerais maintenant revenir sur la notion que j'ai avancée il y a quelques années, mais qui appelle maintenant à être reconsidérée. La métalepse minimale. J'avais donné comme exemple de la phrase, exemple de métalepse minimale, la phrase alsacienne. Pendant que le vénérable ecclésiastique monte les rampes d'Angoulême, il n'est pas inutile d'expliquer. Donc, si j'avais affirmé à l'époque, correctement, je pense que les théories de la métalepse distinguent entre les changements de niveau qui sont transgressifs et de manière minimale et ceux qui le sont de manière patente, l'analyse de la phrase était imprécise. Mieux adapté à la description des propriétés des univers diégétiques impliqués dans les transcriptions métaleptiques sont les 4 échelles identifiées par Hanover. On notera ici, il y a ici 4 échelles. Hein? Vous voyez, scale 1, temporal dimension, scale 2, spatial dimensions, scale 3, the worlds, holistically structured, scale 4, the hierarchical relations between the gigantic universe. Le grand, ah oui, comment? Ah oui, oui, d'accord. Ça se voit? Oui, oui. Voilà, c'est bon. OK. Donc, vous voyez les échelles là. Donc, distinct, collapse. Distinct où il y a effondrement. Donc, une échelle, hein, c'est une gradation. Hein, ce n'est pas des distinctions catégorielles, mais gradationnelles. Donc, on notera, cette phrase de Balzac, on notera que sur tous les points, la phrase en question reste à mi-chemin des deux pôles, au milieu. Le ton de l'histoire, provisoirement suspendu, cohabite avec le ton de la narration. C'est la double temporalité de l'histoire et de la narration. Deuxièmement, on n'est pleinement ni dans la diégèse, ni dans l'extra-diégèse. Troisièmement, la ligne de démarcation entre le monde du dire et celui du dit est floue. Et quatrièmement, les relations hiérarchiques entre les deux niveaux diégétiques dans cette phrase ne sont pas mises en évidence. Donc, je pense que ces 4 échelles sont très, très bien adaptées à l'analyse de cette phrase de Balzac. La phrase illustre donc très bien la nature de la métalepse minimale, susceptible de basculer plus ou moins d'un côté comme vers l'autre. D'ailleurs, l'exemple fait ressortir à l'échelle réduite le fonctionnement de la métalepse dans son état naissant, soulignant le potentiel métaleptique de tout récit, que ce potentiel soit réalisé ou non. Enfin, il confirme le sens spécifique donné à la métalepse par Genette dans son exposé initial du procédé, prendre, raconter en changeant de niveau. Je note que Genette lui-même n'a pas parlé de métalepse minimale. Hein. C'est moi qui ai inventé cette expression. Il a parlé du récit minimal, il n'a jamais parlé de métalepse minimale. Donc, je pense que c'est ce que j'essaie d'apporter au débat. Alors, dans mes commentaires antérieurs, j'avais rattaché la métalepse minimale à la classification en métalepse rhétorique et métalepse ontologique. Mais il s'avère que, par sa définition même, la forme minimale introduit au sein du procédé le principe de gradation, c'est-à-dire le principe de plus ou de moins, et non celui de soit l'un, soit l'autre. Étant donné ses origines, il faut se rappeler que le métalepse est d'ordre rhétorique, dans ses formes faibles, tout comme dans ses formes fortes. En fin de compte, quel que soit le contexte de sa manifestation, la métalepse se produit par le biais de l'acte illocutoire de raconter, ou plus généralement de l'acte de représenter. Dans n'importe quel médium. Hein. Bon, je vais me concentrer ici sur le médium global, mais on peut répondre ces principes au-delà de la langue naturelle. L'importance de la forme minimale de la métalepse, c'est qu'elle permet de rééquilibrer la théorisation du procédé et l'analyse des récits et des autres arts figuratifs où ce procédé est présent. La dominance des questions d'ontologie dans la recherche consacrée à la métalepse date sans doute des propos de Brian McHale dans son livre Postmodernist Fiction de 1967, où il est observé que, je cite, la proximité paradoxale entre le récit enchâssé et le récit premier ou enchâssant viole et met en relief la hiérarchie des niveaux ontologiques. La violation des niveaux ontologiques, appelés également niveau narratif, est assimilée par McHale aux boucles étranges et aux hiérarchies enchevêtrées chez Stapler. Le problème, c'est que ce dispositif, tout comme les paradoxes logiques identifiés par Rorschach d'ailleurs, passe sous silence ce qui est pour Genette une des caractéristiques essentielles de la métalepse, notamment l'importance de la limite que les jeux métaleptiques s'ingénient à franchir au mépris de la vraisemblance, et qui est précisément la narration ou la représentation elle-même. La frontière mouvante mais sacrée entre deux mondes, celui où l'on raconte, celui que l'on raconte. Donc, ce qui manque chez Hofstadter, c'est la notion d'acte illocutoire. Boucle étrange, mais ce sont des formulations purement logiques, pas du tout, ce ne sont pas des actes là. Donc, il est clair que sans narration ou représentation comme acte, aucune violation des frontières ou des niveaux de type métaleptique ne peut avoir dans les arts figuratifs. On trouvera dans la recherche un bon nombre de définitions et de modèles de la métalepse centrés sur le critère ontologique, comme chez McHale ou Ryan. Par exemple, Werner Wolf définit le procédé comme, je cite, métalepse, c'est la transgression paradoxale, généralement intentionnelle de ou confusion entre monde ou sous-monde et ou niveaux qui sont distincts ontologiquement et qui existent ou qui sont désignés dans le cadre des représentations du monde possible. Donc, je ne vais pas essayer de déchiffrer ça. Je veux dire que là aussi, l'accent tombe purement sur l'ontologique et pas sur le locutoire. Le problème des définitions formelles de ce genre est qu'elles cherchent à établir des modèles abstraits et statiques tout en excluant la dynamique discursive potentielle de la métalepse qu'on trouve inscrite, par exemple, dans la forme minimale. La phrase basacienne que j'ai citée comme exemple est donc sujette à des gradations, voire à des expansions. Mais elle amorce aussi le problème des niveaux narratifs. Il n'est pas inutile de garder à l'esprit le fait que chez Genette, les niveaux narratifs forment une des transgressions ou des catégories de la situation narrative. Les deux autres étant le temps de la nation et la personne, mais aussi que c'est dans ce chapitre sur la voix que la métalepse est traitée. Donc, la métalepse est traitée dans le chapitre consacré au temps, au niveau narratif, temps de la narration et personne. Et voilà. Donc, on notera que le sens spécifique de la métalepse, et cela se laisse apercevoir déjà à l'échelle réduite avec l'exemple minéral, représente une radicalisation ou un détournement du principe de différence de niveau. Très important, institutionnel. Le principe de différence de niveau, tout événement raconté par un récit est à un niveau diégétique immédiatement supérieur à celui où se situe l'acte narratif, le producteur de ce récit. Donc, il distingue entre énoncé et énonciation. Je ne peux pas développer ça ici, mais dans la linguistique française, linguistique énonciative française, qui est très développée ici, on fait cette distinction entre sujet de l'énoncé et sujet de l'énonciation. C'est quelque chose de très répandu dans la linguistique française. Bon, il est curieux de voir à quel degré un procédé narratif qui met en cause la cohérence du système narratologique est en même temps une catégorie qui est intégrée dans ce système. C'est un des aspects vraiment paradoxaux de la métalepse. Il n'est ni possible ni utile d'exposer ici le système de niveau narratif, extradiégétique, intradiégétique, métadiégétique, et ses interactions avec la voix narrative, hétérodégétique, homodiégétique, ou de commenter les différentes critiques de ce système, par exemple celle de Richard Walsh. De nombreux commentaires existent, y compris une présentation synthétique par Didier Coste et moi-même, qui est indiquée sur la feuille. Ce qui nous intéresse ici, c'est que la métalepse perturbe ce système de niveau narratif en mettant en cause ou en déstabilisant ses distinctions de base. Car elle y instaure, pour reprendre les mots souvent cités, une frontière mouvante mais sacrée entre deux mondes, celui où l'on raconte et celui que l'on raconte. Nombreux sont ceux et celles qui, par exemple, associent le monde où l'on raconte au monde réel et le monde que l'on raconte au monde fictionnel. C'est très répandu, contestable, mais voilà. On parle de monde ontologiquement distinct plutôt que de monde, plutôt que de niveau narratif. Bon, il y a des personnes qui préfèrent le monde ontologique au niveau narratif. Contestable aussi, à mon avis. Pour affirmer que les métalepses ontologiques correspondent à des transgressions de frontières qui sont physiquement ou logiquement impossibles. Ou encore, comme le précise Marilyn Ryan, comme des transgressions ontologiques ne peuvent se réaliser au niveau de la réalité, elles ne peuvent, par analogie, se réaliser dans un monde fictionnel qui prétend respecter les lois logiques et physiques du monde réel. Donc, ce que j'essaie de faire dans mon exposé, c'est de rééquilibrer l'illocutoire et l'autologie, ou bien le pragmatique et le sémantique. C'est le schéma général de mon exposé. Bon, alors plutôt que de poursuivre l'argument ontologique, j'aimerais attirer votre attention sur les deux premières phases de la présentation initiale de la métalepse en Genève. Bon, le passage d'un niveau narratif à l'autre ne peut en principe être assuré que par la narration, acte qui consiste précisément à introduire dans une situation, par le moyen du discours, la connaissance d'une autre situation. Toute autre forme de transit est, sinon impossible, du moins toujours transgressive. Donc, autrement dit, si dans le passage entre deux niveaux, une connaissance de la nouvelle situation n'est pas assurée par un acte narratif, ce passage entre les deux niveaux, abrupt et sans transition, est transgressif. C'est ce qui se passe dans la phrase de Balzac à une échelle réduite. pendant que l'ecclésiastique monte le rang, le narrateur explique. Il n'y a pas de transition entre ces deux choses. Deux situations et dans deux mondes distincts sont prises ensemble par le biais narratif. Alors, à la lumière de ces considérations, il est préférable de postuler entre deux exégèses, entre deux exégèses non, une frontière étant infranchissable logiquement et physiquement, mais un seuil. En revenant sur la Métalepse dans le nouveau discours de récit, Genette précise, comme cela a été déjà mentionné, qu'elle jette pour le moins un trouble dans la distinction du niveau, en faisant ainsi provoquer une transgression délibérée du seuil d'enchâssement. On peut faire le mot seuil au lieu de frontière. Un seuil est par définition franchissable, voire accueillant, dans un sens comme dans l'autre, à moins qu'il soit jonché d'obstacles ou sous surveillance. La métalepse minimale se trouve sur le point de franchir ce seuil, un pied posé de chaque côté. Alors, la métaphore du seuil suggère que le principe de non-contradiction n'est peut-être pas le concept le plus apte à expliquer ce qui se passe dans le passage entre niveaux narratifs. Une alternative intéressante a été proposée par Julian Hannebeck. En examinant le métalepse chez Genette, selon la logique propositionnelle, je ne donnerai pas ici l'analyse dans le détail, Hannebeck voilà, voilà. Donc, en examinant la métalepse chez Genette, selon la logique propositionnelle, Hannebeck montre que la forme logique du procédé est fondée sur la prémisse suivante. Tous les récits sont des objets qui possèdent des diégèses organisées de façon hiérarchique, chacune créée par un acte de narration. Il s'agit de la forme logique du récit canonique. Quant à la métalepse, elle est définie comme, et c'est important, une proposition conditionnelle dont l'antécédent est une négation. Voici un exemple. Proposition conditionnelle, dans ce récit, aucun narrateur ou existant ne traverse littéralement ou n'annule la frontière entre un niveau narratif dans une violation paradoxale de la logique représentationnelle. Maintenant, proposition conditionnelle dont l'antécédent est une négation. S'il n'est pas le cas, etc., alors ce récit n'est pas ceci est métaleptique. Bon, c'est-à-dire, dans la phrase, pendant que le vénérable ecclésiastique monte les rampes de l'emblème, il n'est pas inutile d'expliquer, il n'est effectivement pas le cas que le narrateur ne traverse pas la frontière entre niveaux narratifs. Donc, je trouve que l'analyse Hannebeck est fort intéressante, à la fois pour sa généralité, sa spécificité, car le critère de conditionnalité est compatible avec la qualité de gradation inscrite dans la métalepse. Avec le principe de non-contradiction marche moins bien. Le critère de conditionnalité est compatible avec la qualité de gradation de la métalepse minimale. Alors, deux autres aspects importants de la métalepse sont la hiérarchie et les niveaux narratifs, que je vais mentionner très brièvement. En revenant à la notion de Merleau-Ryan de pile narrative, il y a un débat concernant l'emplacement des niveaux extradégétiques, en bas de la pile ou en haut. Selon les dispositifs choisis, les métalepses ascendantes et descendantes de l'un sont les métalepses descendantes et ascendantes de l'autre. Ce qui est bon, encore faire tourner la tête. il est néanmoins généralement admis que les métalepses ascendantes sont celles, c'est généralement accepté hein, dans la communauté des chercheurs, que les métalepses ascendantes sont celles qui font entrer le personnage dans la diégèse spatio-temporelle du narrateur, alors que les métalepses descendantes sont celles par lesquelles l'auteur ou le narrateur pénètre dans le monde de l'histoire. Donc, c'est une convention qu'il faut peut-être accepter. En ce sens, l'avocat trouve ces distinctions factices, hein, comme il l'a dit, mais pour des raisons de commodité, il partage la position sur cette question. Bon, strictement parlant, la métalepse elle-même, en soi, n'est pas un phénomène hiérarchisant. Elle perturbe les hiérarchies. C'est une des raisons pour lesquelles il faut rejeter, à mon avis, les termes hypodiégèse et hypodiégétique depuis longtemps courants chez les narratologues. Il est préférable de retenir les expressions métadiégèse et métadiégétique et de rejeter, à mon avis, hypodiégétique. Le préfixe Y signifie parmi, avec, après et non sous, comme le préfixe hypo. C'est sur cette base que l'on peut affirmer que le métarécit est un récit dans le récit, la métadiégèse est l'univers de ce second. Donc, ce n'est pas une question de sur ou sous, c'est dans. Ce raisonnement suggère que dans le fonctionnement de la métalepse, ce sont des relations d'inclusion qui dominent, plutôt que de hiérarchie, que c'est un phénomène par lequel des mouvements intra-métaleptiques et des mouvements extra-métaleptiques sont déclenchés. Les niveaux narratifs, enfin, représentent une notion analytique destinée à décrire des relations entre un acte narratif, si vous voulez, et la diégèse de l'univers spatio-temporel à l'intérieur duquel l'histoire se réalise. Les niveaux narratifs sont utiles pour l'analyse de différents types d'inclusion, d'une histoire dans une autre histoire, par exemple, sur le plan vertical, ou les digressions sur le plan horizontal. Les cas de figure sont nombreux, mais dans la grande majorité, ne posent aucune difficulté particulière de compréhension ou d'analyse. C'est à partir du moment où le passage entre niveaux devient transgressif et paradoxal que les choses se compliquent et que la question de la métalepse se pose. Le procédé dépend de la distinction entre niveaux narratifs, rendant la ligne de démarcation perceptible, mais du même coup problématique et incertaine. Le déréglage des niveaux commence déjà avec la métalepse minimale et la présence de niveaux dans le récit traduit au moins le potentiel d'une métalepse narrative. Alors, on dit que tous les chemins mènent à Rome, mais je n'ai pas tenté de prendre tous les chemins qui mènent à cette ville, ni non plus à tous les chemins qui mènent à la métalepse. En particulier, les chemins et les sentiers de la métalepse diachronique, ceux de ses expansions médiales, ceux de ses liens à la fictionnalité, entre autres. Les titres des interventions inclus dans le programme de ce colloque annoncent plusieurs chemins que nous serons invités à emprunter. Donc, le chemin que j'ai choisi d'explorer est celui de la métalepse minimale. Certes, ce chemin nous ramène aux pages fondatrices de Genette sur le sujet, pages qui restent incontournables, malgré tous les progrès dans le domaine. Mais Genette lui-même n'a rien dit sur la notion de métalepse minimale. Comme je dis, c'est ma propre invention. La notion reste néanmoins inhérente au procédé, à mon avis, et j'ai essayé d'explorer quelques-uns de ces éléments. Françoise, l'avocat, consacre une section de son livre Fait et fiction à l'idée que la métalepse ontologique chasse la métalepse rhétorique. Pour ma part, je préfère chasser la métalepse rhétorique à la faveur de la métalepse minimale, noyau de l'action métaleptique. Voilà, c'est
Merci beaucoup. Non, non, c'est pas super. Non, c'était combien? Je crois 45, 50.
Oh oui, d'accord. Ok.
On a commencé un peu en retard. Super. Merci beaucoup. Je voyais clairement que le public a beaucoup aimé, était beaucoup challenge par la contribution de John Peer. Donc, je crois que c'est le moment en fait, de faire un Q&A, prendre des questions du public. Je suis sûr qu'il y en a plein.
Moi, j'en ai plein.
Non, on a plus donc. Donc, oui, s'il te plaît.
Écoutez, merci beaucoup. C'était très riche et ça m'a permis aussi de réviser mentalement un certain nombre de textes. Donc, l'article de Mallory O'Brien que vous avez cité, qui est un très bel article et qui était resté là dans un coin de ma tête depuis longtemps. J'ai une question qui me renvoie à un échange que j'ai eu hier avec des amis et des collègues. À un moment donné, vous avez parlé de la métalepse d'une certaine manière comme du propre de la fiction. Vous avez parlé de la métalepse
oui.
d'une certaine manière comme si c'était un peu le propre de la fiction. Vous avez dit les fictions sont par nature métaleptiques.
Genette le dit.
Oui, voilà. Vous avez, en reprenant Genette. Et puis vous avez parlé du potentiel métaleptique de tout récit à un moment donné.
Oui.
Bon. Moi, ma question, c'est justement sur les distinctions que l'on a tendance à faire en français et pas forcément dans toutes les autres langues. Et vous avez évoqué cette question-là entre récit, narration, histoire et fiction à proprement parler. Quand, en reprenant Genette, vous dites que les fictions sont par nature métaleptiques, vous entendez par fiction quelque chose qui est de l'ordre du dénominateur commun entre tous ces termes, ou quelque chose qui penche plus du côté du récit, de l'histoire et de l'idée d'une narration au sens large lorsqu'il y a une composante fictionnelle.
Quelle est la question?
La question est, quand vous dites que les fictions sont par nature métaleptiques en reprenant Genette,
oui.
Alors, vous savez qu'en français, il y a des distinctions assez claires entre récit, histoire, narration, fiction. Il peut y avoir un récit avec une composante fictionnelle, mais pas que. Donc, quand vous dites qu'il y a un potentiel métaleptique dans tout récit, vous pensez en particulier à ce que l'on entend en français par récit, ou alors à toutes ces catégories comme s'il s'agissait d'un dénominateur commun.
Je pense au récit au sens de signifiant, comme le dit.
Au récit au sens de signifiant.
Oui.
Ok.
Parce que Genette distingue entre narration comme acte, récit comme texte, et histoire pour signifier.
Oui.
Donc récit, c'est le signifiant, tu vois, et tout signifiant, narratif a un potentiel métaleptique.
Oui.
C'est implicite. Ça se voit déjà dans la phase de Balzac, mais ça rend visible ce qui est déjà présent implicitement. Donc, ce que Genette a dit, bon, il a parlé de récit minimal, l'expansion du verbe, sur des questions proprement narratologiques. Et puis, il a parlé plus tard de la métalepse le métalepse comme embryon de la fiction. Et la fiction, ce n'est pas forcément la même chose que le récit. Hein. Et il fait cette distinction. Hein. Donc, ce que j'essaie de faire, c'est moins sexuel que de Genève, sans doute, mais je dis que le récit minimal a un potentiel que tout récit possède un potentiel métaleptique. Voilà.
Je comprends.
Voilà.
Merci.
C'est un peu entre ces deux positions.
Oui, oui, je comprends.
Voilà.
Je comprends mieux. Merci beaucoup.
Okay, oui. Merci pour la question.
Merci. Je voulais aussi dire qu'on peut accepter des questions en anglais aussi, même en italien, si vous voulez.
Mon italien est trop faible, mais c'est tout. Oui, voilà.
Alors, je vais laisser en français. Je trouve votre conférence pour ce livre en lieu de frontières très intéressant. Et j'ai une question sur votre chronologique, monde et niveau. Niveau semble plutôt technique, mais monde est aussi déjà dans la genèse. Et ma question serait, est-ce que vous avez une préférence pour le niveau monde ou vous direz qu'il y a vraiment une différence entre ces termes
entre niveau et
monde?
Et monde.
Parce que monde et niveau est pour les élèves.
Oui, oui. Je pense que j'ai une certaine difficulté avec l'ontologie appliquée au contenu narratif. L'ontologie, c'est une discipline philosophique gigantesque. Hein, et ça fait partie de la métaphysique, finalement. Je préfère niveau narratif et travaille aussi dans le domaine de l'analyse du récit. Je préfère univers de discours. Univers de discours, voilà, c'est plutôt ça. Je dis cette distinction entre niveau narratif, c'est plutôt univers de discours pour moi. Plutôt que, ontologie, c'est monde. Voilà. C'est quoi le monde? C'est beaucoup trop vaste.
Beh, però in italiano, perdonate.
Très bien.
Magari poi però intanto la metalessi nelle pratiche odierne le più diffuse sceneggia un rapporto tra mondi. In genere sono proprio dei mondi che entrano in rapporto.
Et dans les pratiques dont vous avez parlé, la métalepse met en scène un rapport entre monde.
Métalepse et monde.
La métalepse met en scène une relation, un rapport entre monde.
Entre mondes différents.
Monde différent.
Mondo differente. Dans les cinémas, dans les romans, dans les vidéoclips, ils sont deux mondes, au moins, avec le spectateur, le lecteur et le personnage.
Oui.
Qui entrent en contact d'interprétation.
Oui, oui, donc je n'ai pas abordé la question transmédiale ici, il y a d'autres personnes qui vont faire, donc on travaille sur eux. Mais non, les principes que j'ai essayé de développer, c'est au-delà du langage. Et le potentiel transmédial, de mes réflexions, sont là. Bon, mais je ne l'ai pas développé. Oui, donc il y a le livre de Kukkonen et Klimek, hein, Métalepse de Popular Culture, qui développe ces questions très bien, et puis il y a d'autres ouvrages plus récents. Donc, la métalepse a été formulée, vraiment, la métalepse narrative a été formulée à l'époque du nouveau roman, puis dans le monde chez les Américains, c'était dans le cadre du livre de McHale, Postmodernist Fiction, et la plupart des raisonnements sur la métalepse, c'est pour la littérature moderne, postmoderne, moderne. C'est là que ça a été développé. Et les aspects plus tard, un peu plus tard, dans la culture populaire, le cinéma, etc. Et encore plus récemment, sur le métalepse diachronique. Voilà, ce sont les nouvelles frontières-là. Et bien sûr,
Justement, à propos de ça, c'est peut-être pour ça que pour parler de métalepse minimale, vous avez choisi un exemple de littérature qui n'est pas la littérature à laquelle la métalepse, la réflexion sur la métalepse s'est adressée normalement. Donc, ce n'est pas le nouveau roman, mais c'est Balzac que vous avez choisi.
Oui,
vous l'avez choisi pour ça aussi.
Enfin, on pourrait trouver beaucoup d'exemples de n'importe quel âge. C'est commode, bon, c'est l'exemple que Jeannette donne. Il appelle ça une métalepse banale. Parce que c'est très simple. Mais ce n'est pas banal, à mon avis. C'est un exemple chargé de potentiel.
C'est vrai, on a eu un colloque il y a 1 an et demi, en octobre 2021, sur les temps verbales, en fait. Et ce qui m'intéresse beaucoup, c'est quand il y a une métalepse comme ça, normalement, on change aussi le temps verbal du passé simple, au passé composé, au présent. Je ne sais pas si la réflexion sur la métalepse, si c'est beaucoup sur ça, ou si vous avez quelque chose à dire sur la métalepse minimale.
Je pense que le métalepse peut se révéler de beaucoup de façons, aussi dans le temps de verbe, il y a c'est très subtil. Nous avons à Heidelberg, il y a quelques mois, nous avons parlé de quels sont les rapports entre le soin des livres et des effets métaleptiques. Et aussi, le net, ce n'est pas très explicite, mais ces distinctions entre énoncé et énonciation renvoient à la linguistique de l'énonciation.
Je crois qu'on a une autre question, peut-être. Titi?
Des choses. Peut-être que le problème entre niveau et monde dépend aussi de la perspective narratologique, parce que je pense que niveau, bien pour la théorie structuraliste, mais monde est quelque chose qui appartient plutôt à les théories de Pavel et après de Ryan. Et donc, le niveau va bien pour la littérature, le récit de monde que nous étudions ici. Mais quand on passe à l'intermédiarité, comme on a fait, le monde est plus je trouve dans la pratique.
Oui, non, je comprends bien ce que vous dites. Alors, une des façons d'aller au-delà du récit écrit, c'est de remplacer effectivement les niveaux narratifs par monde. Ça, c'est assez les gens qui travaillent dans le transmet édité, Marie-Laurent compris.
Et
voilà.
Curiosité, si vous êtes d'accord avec Jeannette, quand il dit dans Métalepse que pour lui, Métalepse, par exemple, Ekphrasis, ou je sais pas, les films multiples, des films ou
Oui.
des jeux vidéo.
Mhm.
Si vous êtes d'accord, parce que je ne trouve pas une frontière dans ce cas-là.
Mhm.
La description d'une peinture dans un roman, je ne trouve pas quelque chose de métaleptique. Il n'y a pas de frontière. C'est plutôt, on peut parler de rapport entre texte et image, mais je ne vois pas la métalepse. Et donc, je trouve que dans métalepse, il élargit trop le concept et donc on ne peut pas plus en parler de métalepse.
Exactement. C'est peut-être un des risques quand on parle de monde, hein, métalepse et monde, etc. Le champ de réflexion explose. Donc, et on va bien au-delà des choses qui sont vraiment métalepse. Jeannette parle, en 2004, il parle de voir un acteur promène dans l'eau, il voit un Don Juan. Voilà. Parce qu'on reconnaît, bon, c'est l'acteur qu'on a vu à la télévision qui joue Don Juan, il dit que c'est un métalepse. Mais, parce qu'il est sorti du film dans le monde réel. Et voilà. Voilà, bon, il se moque un peu.
Mais là, je vois la frontière parce que c'est comme si le personnage ou l'acteur est sorti dans la télévision ou le cinéma. Donc, je vois la frontière, mais pour les tradis ou pour les films mythiques, je ne le vois pas.
Mais aussi, il y a plusieurs personnes, Sonia Klimek en particulier, mais pas seul. La métalepse, évidemment, c'est intrafictionnel. La métalepse n'est pas extra-fictionnelle pour elle. Et elle développe tout un bouquin comme ça, sur l'idée qu'en rejetant le livre de 2004, il y a des gens qui pensent que 2004 va trop loin. Mais aussi, ce qui est intéressant aussi, il examine le métalepse en théâtre, au cinéma, télévision, etc. Donc, cette expansion de la métalepse au-delà du récit écrit est nécessaire, mais comporte peut-être des risques. On ne peut pas appeler toute chose métalepse. Moi, je suis métalepse par rapport à ce que j'étais ce matin, parce que je suis ici et pas chez moi.
Et je crois qu'on va passer à pause. On fait une petite pause, ok, super. Donc, je voudrais remercier à nouveau Jean-Pierre pour cette très riche, très engageant contribution. Et je peux prie donc, on a 10 minutes de pause, là, maintenant, et puis on se retrouve avec Martia Pellecani.
Merci.
Oui, c'est vous.
Excusez-moi, on n'entend rien. On n'entend rien. Microphone. Microphone, please. Thank you.
Ah, okay. So
now it's okay.
Ça devrait marcher maintenant. Vous nous entendez?
Oui, oui, parfaitement, merci.
Super. Okay. So it's still a pleasure to continue this conversation with you, and especially with Marzia Beltrami. Marzia Beltrami studied in Milan and Oxford and received a PhD from Durham University. In 2019-2020, she's been visiting research fellow at the Medical Humanities in Context Lab and CERC at Sorbonne Nouvelle. And since 2020, she's postdoctoral research fellow in comparative literature at the University of Tartu in Estonia. Yes. Right? Good. Where she's also a member of the Narrative Culture Cognition Research Group. Her current research project explores the ethical implications of fictional representations of impossible body minds in post-Second World War literature, and especially in Italo Calvino and Primo Levi. More broadly, her research focuses on Italian and Anglophone contemporary narrative, cognitive narratology, and narrative ethics. She's the author of Special Plots, Virtuality, and the Embodied Mind in Baricco, Camilleri, and Calvino. And today, the title of her contribution is Pro and Against Immersivity, as you can read on the slide, Embodied and Special Implications of Metalepsis.
I dropped the spatial for
okay, brilliant. Very good. So please welcome Marzia Beltrami, and I think I'm going to move, but I'm afraid you can't see the screen actually either.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to the organizer for putting together such a wonderful event and for inviting me to be part of it. So it's really a privilege and a bit scary to be right after Jean-Pierre, but let's get it started. So the work I would like to present to you today is a work in progress, or I should better say a work at the outset, at least as far as metalepsis is concerned. But I thought that this would be like the perfect context to start discussing with you some of the issues involved and potential pathways for research. So as the title of my contribution anticipates, the angle from which I'm going to discuss metalepsis is that of the reception. So I will be looking at the effects metalepsis can have, particularly in relation to the form of engagement that we would describe as immersion. Metalepsis, in fact, is generally regarded as a device operating against the reader's immersivity, and this is because it is a strategy that would break the mimetic illusion. And yet, to immediately complicate the picture, it can be observed with Jean-Pierre that, and I quote, the anti-illusionistic quality of metalepsis has never been called into question. Even so, there remains the thorny question of knowing under what conditions it is illusion breaking or illusion building, end quote. So in this paper, I'm going to suggest that even though metalepsis does go against the mimetic illusion, this might not necessarily mean that immersion in the sense of engagement in the narrative fiction is equally disrupted. So the reason why the two things, so metalepsis has anti-mimetic and metalepsis as anti-immersive, are often bound together is due to the ways in which the experience of engagement has been conceptualized. Engagement has been mostly characterized in terms of immersion in the story or in the work of art, an immersion which is sustained by its mimetic illusion and therefore by its strong continuities with reality and real life. In her recent book, Self-Reflective Fiction and 4E Cognition, published by Routledge in 2023, so just a few months ago, the narrative theorist Merja Polvinen suggests something different. So drawing on ample work in narrative and fiction theory, Polvinen suggests that engagement and immersion are not necessarily defined by their similarity or simulation of reality only. Rather, awareness of the fictionality of the narrative is an integral part of how we experience fiction, a part that may usually run in the background, yes, and yet must never be fully forgotten for the experience to be successful. It follows that metafictional strategies that bring this artificiality to the fore are not necessarily breaking such engagement or even immersion in the narrative experience. So metalepsis is arguably one of these strategies. So what I wish to do in this presentation is to explore how metalepsis can be made more embodied and thus more engaging at an unconscious level, and how this operation can be foregrounded by an active approach to imagination and narrative understanding. So in fact, today I'm going to touch upon three main points, mutually interrelated. So first, the embodied dimension of metalepsis. Two, an alternative conceptualizations of immersivity. And three, by looking at the case study taken from Italo Calvino, I'm going to add a small step to my ongoing project, which focuses on what might be called an activist Calvino, which focuses on how Calvino's approach to imagination may be seen as manipulation. So I've already skipping one part, so I'm going to straight into some examples. So since metalepsis means literally a jump across, it might be argued that it is inherently embodied in as much as it draws on our basic understanding of what a jump is in order to be conceptualized. But like leaving this provocation aside, and even if we don't want to attribute too much power to the suggestions of etymology only, there are indeed cases in which this shift, this opening into or contamination between narrative levels or worlds may be expressed in more or less embodied terms. So as I will try to show, the result is that by doing so, the metalepsis gives embodied substance to the boundaries it crosses. So as Karin Kukkonen and Marco Caracciolo might say, it thickens them, these boundaries, and the levels it connects by leading agents to move from and into them. So let's see an example. Yes, concrete example from Calvino. So I would like particularly to focus on the origin of the birds, the uccelli, which is one of the cosmicomical stories included in T0, published in 1967. So being included in the section entitled More of QWFWQ, this story bears significant resemblances with the cosmicomics published 2 years before in 65, starting from Kuf, as like short version some people say, being again the main character and narrator. And yet its alignment with the more decidedly experimental spirit of the second collection is revealed by its stronger metafictional dimension. The reason why Calvino is such an interesting case study, at least I think, to consider in the frame of our conference, is that his work combines in unique and fascinating ways formal experimentation, which usually tends to draw the attention onto the artificiality of narrative, and continuous research into new ways of engaging the reader. Ways that, despite what has been said about Calvino's disembodiedness and penchant for abstraction, are also deeply embodied in nature. The cosmicomical tales, in particular, have been often presented as stories in which Calvino addresses the unrepresentability of experience, or unrepresentable or hard to picture experience. But now, even though that Calvino should point at the impossibility of capturing some experiences is certainly right, he does so mostly by piggybacking on what readers can experience, and indeed have experienced in the most basic way, drawing on their perceptual experience. So, reverting to the origin of the birds, from the very outset of the story displays features that heavily point to an embodied dimension. So, I'm putting just in English. So, one morning, I hear some singing outside that I've never heard before. Or rather, since we didn't yet know what singing was, I hear something making a sound that nobody has ever made before. I look out, I see an unknown animal singing on a branch. So this is a strategy actually often implemented in the cosmicomics too, which relies on assuming what are called the experiential traces of the reader, so which means their memories of past perception and experiences, in order to engage their embodied responses. And here is a similar example actually from the cosmicomics, so at daybreak. We are hitting something, a meaningless expression, since before then nothing had ever hit anything, you can be sure. But one that took on meaning at the very moment it was uttered. That is, it meant the sensation we were beginning to experience. So you can see, like, Calvino has used this technique of triggering and calling an experience and then saying, oh, but this experience didn't mean anything to us at that point before. So as you can see, in both cases, Calvino explicitly tries to capture an unrepresentable experience, which would be, what does it feel like to hear or feel something which we have never perceived before? But he does so by evoking in the reader the memory and the experience of bird singing or of pressing our weight against something. So, and then prompting us to imagine how it would be like not to be familiar with such sensation. But of course, it's too late, because in our imagination, that feeling, that sound have been already evoked and cannot be suppressed. It's the so-called curse of knowledge, so a cognitive bias that makes it very hard to really pretend not to know something. Or if I tell you not to think about the elephant in the room, you're going to be thinking exactly about the elephant. So I would say that we have an instance here of what Marco Caracciolo would call bodily defamiliarization. So that is, and I quote, the process whereby human embodiment is evoked and at the same time imaginatively reconfigured, end quote, and used as a springboard to obtain a defamiliarizing effect. But what I wanted to highlight actually by quoting this passage are two main things. First, that by foregrounding embodiment through the experience of sound, the story prepares the ground and the reader's imagination to a heightened sensitivity to embodied cues. And second, that to be foregrounded here is not just the perceptual experience of hearing a sound, but also the realization that experiences that we might regard as common and even banal, like bird singing, may not be so, which already triggers a sort of moment of self-reflection. And shortly after the passage I just quoted, the metalepsis occurs. Now I'll erase him, he says, or thinks. And to depict this desire of his, this is Kuf who is speaking. To depict this desire of his, we could have him draw a diagonal line across the frame. The bird flaps his wings, eludes the diagonal, and flies to safety in the opposite corner. Is happy because with that diagonal line between them, he can't see the board anymore. The bird pecks at the line, breaks it, and flies at Old Who. Old Who, to erase him, tries to draw a couple of crossed lines over him. At the point where the two lines meet, the bird lights and lays an egg. Old Who pulls the lines from under him, the egg falls, the bird darts off. There is one frame all stained with egg yolk. So there are in fact multiple metalepses. The first is what I think Fludernik would call a narratorial or type 1 ontological metalepsis, as the narrator, actually together with the narratee, suggests that they could have who doing something. And however, this case is made more complex by the fact that what the narrator makes the character do is in turn also a metaleptic operation, because who is made draw a diagonal line that is both an element of the story and of the discourse, as it interacts with the border of the frame and with the elements of the comic strip that define the diegetic space and do not belong to the story world, the same story world of Who. So this intensely metaleptic passage continues with both Who and the bird, which belong to the narrated, thus the level of the story, interacting directly with graphic elements of the strip. The metalepsis describing these interactions may be what Frank Wagner would call metaleptic movements from lower to a higher level as the character transgresses the extradiegetic boundary. So, how can a narrative featuring such a prolonged metalepsis and several metanarrative and metafictional commentaries maintain his reader's engagement? Can it still ensure at least some form of immersion? As anticipated at the beginning of the paper, it is hard to deny that the anti-mimetic nature of metalepsis. However, scholars have looked at ways of softening or finding exceptions to this assumption. Schaeffer has suggested that from a cognitive perspective, metalepsis as a representational technique is not incompatible with immersion and rather epitomizes the split state of mind that characterizes fictional immersion. Werner Wolf, on the other hand, after describing metalepsis as a metafictional device that unequivocally prevents immersion and aesthetic illusion in 1993, later reconsidered his clear-cut position and explored under what conditions, what he calls filter factors, the anti-immersive effect of metalepsis might be neutralized in 2013. Among the factors that may work towards ensuring immersion even in presence of metaleptic events is narrative, what Wolf calls narrative mood. And if we look at Calvino's stories, the general mood is decidedly playful, even though not truly comic, rather than serious. And according to Wolf, this should endorse a sense of detachment. So verging towards the comic rather than serious should encourage a sense of detachment rather than immersion on the reader's part. But however, in this case, I think that the immersive adhesion is arguably not fully disrupted, because by contrast, what is seriously engaged with is the ekphrastic representation of the strip, its potential appearance and organization. So indeed, we cannot forget that although the metalepsis is designed through the representation of a comic strip, what we're actually taking in is a verbal account of it. So it is a meta-narrative metalepsis, as it engages with the act of narration and explicitly addresses the question of how a story could be best told. So, but I give you an example of how we could look at this text by using Wolf, and he uses effective, extra-compositional and generic framing conditions that may filter the breaking, so like softened the breaking of immersion. But what I suggest by drawing on embodiment of metalepsis, and what I believe Polvinen argues, rather builds on a different way of looking at fictional engagement enabled by a cognitive perspective. So according to Wolf, this is like his definition of aesthetic illusion. It consists predominantly of a feeling of variable intensity, of being imaginatively and emotionally immersed in a represented world, and of experiencing this world in a way similar, though not identical, to real life. This constitutive impression of immersion is, however, counterbalanced by a latent rational distance, which is a consequence of the culturally acquired awareness of the difference between representations and reality. So this is his definition of aesthetic illusion. The hypothesis I propose in this paper is that to foreground bodily patterns when implementing the metalepsis already engages readers at the basic unconscious level, even though the artificiality of the fictional narrative is exposed. So in this sense, embodiment acts unconsciously in an immersive direction, not in the story world, not immersion in the story world, but by making the reading experience more engaging and real-like in its experientiality. So this strategy might not only counterbalance the anti-immersivity triggered by the self-reflexive device. And in fact, we could see this bodily engagement not as aiming at counterbalancing effect, but rather as contributing to make more immersive a mode of reception of the narrative that is not solely mimetic. So very cryptic claim. And to unpack this rather cryptic claim, let's introduce some ideas explored by Merja Polvinen in her recent book on self-reflective fiction and 4E cognition. Now here I forgot to put a slide with the nice 4 E's all explained, but just follow me, please. So 4E cognition is a short form to refer to a view of cognition as embodied. Well, 4 E's. So first of all, cognition as embodied, which means that our mind is shaped by the type of body we have and by the type of interactions that we are allowed for by this body, by such body. Embedded, which refers to our mind as developing in continuous interaction with this environment, so embedded in an environment. Extended, which sees the mind as not confined to the brain or to the body, but integrating technological artifacts and tools through which it manages to successfully perform its operation. For instance, let's think of pen and paper if you make a complicated calculation. Like in the extended view perspective, pen and paper are part of the mind because we do the calculation thanks to them as well. And 4E, inactive. So this latter E needs some further clarification because it is the specific angle developed by Polvinen. So to understand cognition as inactive means to claim that the mind and the world are co-constitutive. This means that our cognition shapes itself through interaction with the surrounding environment, and that mind and environment are mutually defined by what is relevant to each other. Indeed, an active view of the mind holds, and I quote, that cognition is an organism activity of working out the relevance or significance of external features of the environment. So that is what cognition is, to work out what is relevant for the cognizing being. And I was quoting from Caracciolo and Kukkonen. Generally speaking, although each one of these angles imply a specific traditions and focus of studies, When we talk of 4E approaches to cognition, we refer to cognition as a dynamic process that involves complex feedback between an embodied being and its environment. And we refer to fields of research that, among other things, draw more on phenomenology and philosophy of mind rather than on computational models and analytic philosophy, which rather characterize the so-called first-generation cognitive sciences as opposed to second, focusing on embodiment. So this being said, I'd like to look at quite a long quotation from Paul Vinen, which, however, goes directly to how this view of cognition is relevant to the study of narrative fiction. This is Paul Vinen. So I present the experience of narrative fiction as a form of enactive perception, where fictionality, instead of being a quality that fades to invisibility in order to be effective, is rather the perspective that makes the perception and comprehension of fiction as fiction possible. Furthermore, our experience of fictionality need not clash with our perception and engagement with the fictional world and its characters, but is conjoined with it. The enactive actualizing of a fictional narrative need not be understood as shuttling between a reenactment of a character's experience, so the very similar content of the fictional representation, and the artificiality of the discourse patterning of the narrative. Instead, it is an engagement with an abstract cognitive environment that encompasses everything from deep emotional connection with avowedly imaginary people to the literary works communicative stages as a work of fiction. So what she argues, in other words, is that what we engage with is not simply the mimetic world represented through the narrative. The term she proposes instead is that of the literary work as an enacted cognitive environment to indicate an imaginary entity produced in the reader's mind, or recipient's, viewer, whatever is the semiotic object you are considering, through the prompts, which is produced in the recipient's mind through the prompts and cues and guidance provided by the text. This entity can be made sense of, so can be engaged with, thanks to and depending on what affordances it provides. Now, the term affordance is like a key to the enactivist program, and it has been introduced by ecological psychologist Jane Gibson in the 70s, and indicates I quote, the action potentials offered by an environment to a particular cognizer. For example, like just to give you a practical example, a chair for us human would be an affordance for sitting. So this is what we would see in a chair. Like if we were insects, we would see something else. We would perceive it as an affordance meant to do other things. So Paul Vinen observes that immersion is generally understood to be resisted or cancelled out by moments of self-reflection, not last because immersion is often coupled with emotional engagement, which is also believed to be disrupted by self-reflection. So by this, but this significantly depends on how we conceptualize immersion in the first place. Traditionally, to describe the experience of engagement in reading fiction, for example, Richard Gehrig has used the metaphor of being transported. Marie-Laure Ryan has spoken of recentering in the fictional world by drawing impossible worlds theory, while David Herman has further elaborated on this recentering process through the eidetic shift theory and cognitive linguistics. So all these metaphors are surely very effective, and yet Paul Vinen advances two main concerns. First, they all tend to put the reader in a rather passive position, so being transported, being recentered, and so on. And secondly, they afford ways of talking about the experience of fiction in terms of different spaces through which our attention moves across, and therefore end up overemphasizing the dichotomy between being inside and outside these worlds. Also, more recent studies that acknowledge and try to account for how the reader might be absorbed by the content of the fictional world as well as by its form, still distinguish between these two, so positing a sort of productive oscillation between story world absorption and artifact absorption. So she was trying to make the point of how hard it is to actually overcome this dichotomy. So by looking at the experience of fiction as production and management of a non-actual cognitive environment, which provides specific affordances to be enacted, Paul Vinen seeks to rectify these biases, which she sees as produced by the type of metaphor we use to conceptualize things like immersion. In this new light, self-reflective strategies, including metalepsis, could be regarded as not disruptive of immersivity, Because in as much as a specific text is designed to offer as affordances elements that also foreground its artificiality, these per se should not hinder readers' engagement. As engagement depends on enacting the appropriate affordances and not the fact that these affordances should scaffold simulation of lifelike environments or believable characters. So personally, I think that this set of observations and claims are meaningful to the study of narrative fiction more generally, and particularly of those works that display a stronger self-reflective dimension, as it is in these cases that this approach might cast the most unexpected results. And yet I also recognize that this view works particularly well with Calvino. And this is because some of these ideas resonate strongly with Calvino's own poetic research. So his research into how we make sense of experience and of the world around us, and into how we can communicate these to others. So if we revert to the story, The Origin of the Birds, it seems to me that its complex meta-narrative and metafictional dimension, and specifically the prolonged metalepsis that Calvino designs here, seeks to represent a way of making sense of things that is strongly aligned with the enactive view. Even though I should say out loud, Calvino never talks about enactivism nor engages with philosophers that are part of this tradition. So I've just mentioned Calvino's way of making sense of things. And in fact, the very concept of sense-making is key to the enactivist program. As the term enactivism suggests, this view is very much centered on the idea that understanding and living happen through action, through interaction. So for instance, perception is not seen as the passage of information from the outside to the inside, but something we do. So it is by interacting with the environment, moving in it, and touching and smelling and feeling your body in it, that we learn it. And at the same time, gaining knowledge of the world, gaining knowledge about this world, but also shaping our own cognition while we do so. So to quote Paul Gillen's explanation again, sense-making, and I'm quoting, sense-making means this dimension of cognition whereby we engage and enact the world through perception. The process is best described as bringing forth a world through skillful sensory motor action, as opposed to receiving data from the outside and representing a world in our brains. So sense-making, end quote. Sense-making has something happening through skillful sensory motor action. So if we go back to the metalepsis, it seems to me that this is precisely what Kuf, the narrator of the story, and via him Calvino, is doing when he tries out different ways of telling a story. No, he's not, sorry, here in the quotation, but in the story he says, now these stories can be told better with strip drawings, and this is how he starts imagining the situation. Or even when he gives directives to his recipients as to how they should imagine this and that, and I quote, it's best for you to try on your own to imagine the series of cartoons and blah, blah, blah. And even more so when he draws the reader's attention onto how different media bring forth different aspects of an experience, waiting and considering alternative options. So Calvino's emphasis on action, he's dwelling on how who tries to attack the bird by using literally whatever he has in hand, including pieces of his own reality. That is the elements delimiting and shaping the diegetic space, is stressing precisely how skillful sensory motor action is our main way of making sense of the environment and of experience. So of course, he frames this in a humorous and entertaining way, but this doesn't make the point less effective. So more specifically, Calvino's skillful action could be phrased as manipulation, I think. And through manipulation is how Calvino gives rise to the metaleptic events, also in this quote, in this passage. This idea that Calvino cultivates an understanding of imagination as manipulation, I've started exploring in an article that should come out soon, actually, in Italian Studies. But to give you a sense of how strongly Calvino's view resonates with the enactive theory of imagination, let me quote a brief passage from Sean Gallagher, who is like one of the philosophers most engaged with enactivism. So he argues that the imaginative practice is to manipulate thoughts, images, take them up and play with them, move them around in order to solve a problem, or map them onto novel affordance spaces. So Calvino designs a story that represents and thus enacts the very act of imagining something as a continuous manipulation of the content of a story as well as its form. By reading such story, readers arguably are strongly prompted to reenact the same movement. So because this manipulation is expressed in heavily embodied and material terms through bodily and kinetic patterns that are evoked, the type of engagement is also embodied, even though these are very artificial and abstract operations. So to conclude, embodiment can interact with and impact on metalepsis in a number of ways. First, because metaleptic movement can be thickened in an embodied sense, which means that they can be expressed in a marked way by building on perceptual and sensory motor patterns that evoke bodily experience at an unconscious level, thus making also potentially abstract operation feel much more real. But secondly, embodiment is relevant at the theoretical level because an embodied-oriented approach, so more specifically in its enactive articulation, is what allows us to conceptualize our experience of fiction in a less passive way, I think, and to reframe the dichotomy between mimetic content and artificial form. So by understanding the literary work as an enacted cognitive environment endowed with affordances of various kinds that readers are invited to manipulate and actualize, metalepsis ceases to be a device that distracts readers from the real stuff of fiction and reminds us that our engagement with fiction heavily draws on our experience and knowledge of real life as much as of the conventions, our knowledge of the conventions and mechanisms of literature. So of course, that doesn't mean that the effect of metalepsis is not often surprising or even shocking one. So I cannot but agree with both that cases that, like Calvino's, that go against the anti-immersive potential. So they are actually immersive. The cases of metalepsis that are much immersive are indeed a minority. However, the perspective opened by research like Polvinen's, and which has begun to outline here, reminds us that if metalepsis can produce a surprising effect, this must not necessarily be framed in terms of breaking of our feeling of immersion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marzia, and for such a, I think we are going to go on to the next speaker. But first, I wanted to thank you very much for such a rich and intense paper, and for giving us new understanding, I guess. Okay, a new way of thinking about immersion, and I kept hearing activist Calvino at some point.
I know, like, I should have written it somewhere actually.
Inactivist Calvino. We'll have time to discuss that later. Of course, after we hear from Marco Bernini. Yes. How's this going to work from a technical point of view? Do we need to, Marco, can you hear me?
I think he's muted.
Yes, can you hear me now? Thanks.
We can hear you. We can hear you loud and clear. So
brilliant.
Okay. So I'm just going to introduce Marco Bernini. It's such a pleasure to have him with us, even though, I mean, it's less of a pleasure that he's not actually with us in the flesh. But Marco Bernini is an associate professor in cognitive literary studies at the University of Durham as well. His research focuses on narrative theory, modernist contemporary fiction, and cognitive science. He works in particular on the relationship between mind and narrative, and chiefly on how literary narratives explore and model cognitive processes. He also has worked on the extended mind theory and authorial agency, and empirical studies on readers, and on narrative and cognition theories of complexity and emergence. He has recently led an interdisciplinary project on dreaming and narrative, which you can look it up online. It's thresholdsworld.org.uk if you're interested, and publish a monograph, Beckett and the Cognitive Method, Mind, Models, and Exploratory Narratives. So we're going to continue on exploring the connections, I guess, between metalepsis and cognitive studies. Marco's paper that's titled Experiential Crossing, Phantasmal Intersubjectivity and the Metaleptic Immersivity of Fictional Characters.
Thanks, Antonio.
I'm looking forward to
Voilà. Ouais, bon après-midi à tous. C'est un plaisir d'être ici. Merci à vous de m'avoir invité. Je suis désolé que mon français soit devenu poussiéreux et épouvantable, donc je vais parler en anglais. And now even my Italian is getting dusty since I came to the UK. I'll try to share now my screen. Right. Can you see my screen now? Hopefully, yes. Right. And now you will disappear. I will disappear. And here we are. Okay. So, a few years ago, before starting to draft an earlier version of this idea, which is now submitted as an article to Poetics Today, to deliver a paper at the University of California, Santa Barbara, I was looking for some novel set in Southern California to read before my journey. And I guess I'm not the only one who, having to visit a country or a city for the first time, looks for a preparatory story world to enrich what would be the actual experience of a place. Why do we do so? Arguably, it is because we want the story world to function as a background to make our real life experience more immersive, increasing what we can call the real world immersivity. We hope that once we will be physically there, elements of the story world will emerge back into and enrich, make more salient, layered, and dense our real life explorations. This is a sort of what I would call metaleptic tourism, whereby we decide to experience a fictional world first, hoping that somehow it will later converge with or emerge within our experience of the actual place. In other words, we are preparing a violation of ontological boundaries. The consequences of this preparation, of this gateway we want to open, are largely unpredictable and highly subjective. The very possibility of this convergence between worlds, however, is a telltale sign of what Fox Harrell has called the phantasmal component of everyday cognition. As Harrell explained in his book, Phantasmal Media, our cognitive life is rife with what he defines as phantasms, presences that, despite being non-actual, are felt as compossible to our world, contributing to the meaning of our experience.
Marco,
Harrell example.
Marco, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Can you just choose the option full screen so that we can see the slides?
Okay, how do I do that? Right. So I thought that so if I put it like this in full screen, does it change?
We can see, but it's too small to read.
All right. Okay. So how am I supposed to put it like full screen? I have no idea because I'm not. How could I do that? Because I was in presentation mode on PowerPoint. So can you try to eventually to pin my window? If you pin, because I was already in presenter mode, Guido.
Okay. Now we can see you, but we can't see the slides.
Right. Now I'm in presenter mode. I cannot see you. I only see my PowerPoint full screen. I can starting your screen or browser window can cause an infinity mirror. No, okay. I mean, I can stop and try again, but I feel like
just restart. Let's see if it's better.
Well, yeah. Sorry about that. We did try it before, but so you're presenting your screen. Right. And now I'm going to put my PowerPoint in full screen.
Yes.
Now, how does it look? Is it full screen now?
Yeah, I don't know why, but it's not exactly in full screen as it was when we tried.
That's really weird. Because it's
now we can see everything as a full screen, but when you choose the option full screen for the slides, they're too small. I mean,
it doesn't go full screen. Yeah, I'm sorry about that because there is quite a lot of text in the slides, but I've done nothing differently from what we tried before. So either you can try and eventually pin my well, yeah. I'm in presenter mode now, and
Okay.
Can you hide the participants?
No, you can't.
Can you send us this presentation and we can put it on the screen? So you don't understand.
all right, there is quite a lot of clicking, Antonio, so it's actually it's gonna be difficult. But just
I mean, we'll try the best.
oh, okay. Let me try only this thing, Guido, and tell me if it changes something.
Okay.
Does it change something?
No.
No. All right. Well, I guess we tried. I'm not sure what happened.
When you tried the first time, it wasn't like that, but it's fine. I mean, we'll try to follow as much as we can.
Okay. Well, sorry about that. I'll send you the slide as soon as I finish the presentation.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Well, where were we? So what I call the phantasmal component of everyday cognition contributing to the meaning of our experience. Well, in our examples, the real-world balcony, and I'm quoting from Hara's book, balcony might prompt you to imbue the scenario at hand with deeper significance. You might imagine call up to your lover on the balcony, as you just saw in a scene from a filmic adaptation of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. The results of this mapping of imagery and ideas which you previously experienced onto immediate sensory perception of the balcony are phantasms, end quote. In this respect, story world elements can become phantasmal presences in our everyday cognition, texturing our mental states, layering the meaning of our lives, and disclosing new possibilities for thoughts or actions. To date, though, cognitive narrative theory, and in particular theories of immersion, have focused exclusively on the other direction of transit, namely on how our real past experience can sustain, enhance, or modify our experience of a literary narrative, or its story world immersivity. By contrast, how fictional elements from a story world can surface or transmigrate into real-life cognition has been basically ignored. In short, we still lack a theory of what I would call from now on immersivity. In trying to sketch this theory today, however, my focus won't be on the immersivity of fictional places, which is something I'm working on separately, but on the immersivity of literary characters. The need for a theory of literary characters' immersivity came to me from a study we have conducted with 400 readers in 2016 of the Edinburgh Book Festival, now published on consciousness and cognition. In this study, we were surprised to find out that 20% of the readers reported to experience the presence of fictional characters outside of the immediate context of reading. I have suggested to call this phenomenon experiential crossing because characters seem to cross the boundary of the story worlds and accompany or stay with the reader in real-world situations. This crossing seems to be spontaneously activated by a wide range of triggers, mainly contextual or affective. To have a complex phenomenology, characters are perceived either as silent, auditory, multisensory, or conceptual presences, and to show different degrees of felt presence in the reader's minds, or even in their physical environment. Characters' metaleptic immersivity seem to me both intriguing and complex because it raises important issues regarding the possibility of entering in the real world intersubjective relations with non-actual beings, or what I would call from now on a phantasmal intersubjectivity. By chance, I found already traces of this peculiar intersubjective relation in the preface of the book I had chosen for my journey to California, Ask the Dust by John Fante. In the introduction to the book, Charles Bukowski explains how, and I quote, Fante had a mighty effect upon me. Not long after reading these books, I began to living with a woman. She was a worse drunk than I was, and we had some violent arguments. And often I would scream at her, "Don't call me son of a bitch. I'm Bandini, Arturo Bandini," end quote. As many of the hopefully more sober readers in our study, here Bukowski is implying that the protagonist of the novel has violated the boundaries of Fante's story world to become an integral yet phantasmal part of his life. Since total identification, as I will stress in a moment, is impossible, if not in psychiatric delusions, even when the otherness of a character's immersivity seems to fully merge with ourself, it will still be activating a dynamic intersubjective relation. If the experiential crossing and immersivity of literary characters are still under investigated, it is rather easy to find representations of this phenomenon in cultural artifacts. Just to give you a preliminary example from a movie, in Play Again Sam by Herbert Ross, Sam, Woody Allen, suddenly starts to perceive the felt presence of Humphrey Bogart, the vividness of this experience being so strong that we can actually see Bogart in the room. The appearance of Bogart is triggered by the desperate need of Sam for advices about women. This crossing of Bogart from the fictional world of Casablanca to Sam's room has a sustained comic effect, but also some concrete positive outcomes. Even if all the advances from Bogart are not suitable to Sam because they have indeed different mindsets and aesthetic appeal, the dialogic conversation and negotiation with Bogart's way of thinking, talking, and acting does affect Sam. It keeps him working on his strategies. It makes him feel less alone in his enterprise and realize what he can and, equally important, cannot learn from his fictional companion. Another example from cinema can be found in the more recent Babadook by Jennifer Kent, a movie which delicately explores grief as a personified phantasm crossing the boundary of a children's book to haunt a family and teach them acceptance. Representation of characters' immersivity, rightly depicted as the upshot of sustained, recursive, and deep immersion in a particular book or imaginary universe. To provide a theoretical model for the study of immersivity, it seems therefore to me intuitive to look for links with models of narrative immersion. So here's the outline of my talk today. In the first section, I will build on and adapt models of narrative immersion to prepare the ground for my parallel model of immersivity. In the second section, I will present the model and discuss the data we collected in our study. In particular, I will focus on degrees of presence and on intersubjective dynamics. In the conclusion, I will very briefly argue that immersivity of fictional or literary characters can provide some empirical evidences and further theoretical ground to sustain claims about the impact of literary narratives in everyday life. Right, so following something similar to Archimedes' principle, characters' metaleptic immersivity appears to be the buoyant upward force equal to the downward force of imaginative plunges into story worlds. To provide a theoretical model for the study of immersivity, it is therefore intuitive to look for links with and to manipulate models of narrative immersion. So here are the few key tenets of immersion theories in relation to fictional characters, which will be relevant to a model of immersivity. Whenever we claim to be immersed, transported, or lost in a story world, we are implying two useful ontological distinctions. First, we assume that there is a divide between the world of the reader's real self and the world of a fictional character. Second, we are alluding to the distinction between what it feels actual and non-actual. According to Ryan, when we are properly immersed in a fictional world, that world becomes perceived by the reader to a certain extent as the actual world, the world where events, actions, emotions, and perceptions are occurring or unfolding. By contrast, the real world of the reader becomes, to a certain extent, perceived as non-actual or peripheral. To visualize this, I will put the reader's real self circle, RS, with dotted lines to suggest that herself as, during narrative immersion, a dominant non-actual ontology. Whereas I put a continuous line in the fictional character's self, FC, or what Mikhail Bakhtin has called a character zone, to suggest that this zone of action and perception of a character is dominantly perceived by the reader as actual or present. As Ryan points out, however, the reader never completely forgets herself, blocking out her physical reality, but she maintains a split presence, or in Ryan's words, a split loyalty to the real and the textual world. One of the scope of immersion theory is to account for how these two worlds and selves come into contact. Borrowing a concept from media study, studies, Biocca describes literature as a technology allowing telepresence, or the virtual connection between two separate places. In Biocca's definition, telepresence is the sense of being there, the level of vividness of a remote or simulated place experienced via a communication technology, end quote. Ryan has called the dynamic allowing telepresence a fictional recentering, whereby the reader's self is relocated into the textual world of the character. Telepresence and fictional recentering can result in different degrees of proximity with the character's perspective. To incredibly oversimplify the many possibilities, let's say that our projected self, PS in the model, can either be relocated alongside the character, watching and perceiving her from the outside, let's call it projected togetherness, or we can be internally recentered, PS2, within her own experiential perspective, call it projected insideness. In both cases, however, we are projected within what I would call the character's zone of fictional co-presence, the area that includes the inner experience and immediate external perceptions of a character. If, as in a metafictional scenario, a fictional character could feel our presence in her world, whenever we enter a zone of fictional co-presence, she would experience us as phantasmal entities, either beside her or inhabiting her mind. Between projected togetherness and projected insideness, however, the phenomenology and processing of the former seems less problematic. If we agree, that our experience of mimetic fictional worlds share cognitive modalities with real-life cognition, we can assume that when positioning an outer intimacy with the character, we will deploy similar cognitive mechanisms to the ones we use in real-life social cognition. For instance, we can use empathy, we can attribute intentions to a character's behavior, we can even overhear a character's conversation. In short, projected togetherness allows what the philosopher of mind Daniel Dennett has called an heterophenomenological relationship with characters, or what evolutionary psychology calls a parasocial relationship. Projected insideness, on the other side, appears more problematic. The possibility of entering, participating, and contributing to another mind's cognition is precluded to us in real life, and it has been regarded as one of the exceptional features of fiction. How is this overlap made possible? The first answer is that it is possible because, as narratologist Yuri Margolin has noted, fictional characters are ontologically thin, having only a limited number of properties. In other words, fictional characters are incomplete or underdetermined, and their incompleteness allows and even calls for what readers can bring from the necessity for a character to be immersive is needed, and a recent study by Mosley and colleagues has confirmed that complex characters are perceived as the more engaging. Yet, no matter how complex, they will always have a space for the reader to feel, a possible intersection to concede. The second answer is that the overlapping never results in complete identification. Thanks also to the split loyalty of the reader's mind, she would never feel completely to become another mind. With the exception of psychiatric delusions or telepathy, the feeling of total coincidence with another mind is precluded to us, even in the fictional experience, also I would argue. And this is an important point for what will follow, because it means that even when we have a feeling of projected insideness with the fictional characters, we will always perceive and be subject to a tension, a differential space, a negotiation between her and our perspective self, emotions, beliefs, and so on. In other words, between the image of our projected self and the character's perspective or individual zone, there will always be an intersubjective relation. This space of intersubjective negotiation potentially equals the character's zone of fictional co-presence. Whenever and at whatever proximal distance from the character we are in this area, we are potentially exposed to her influence, and in turn, we can affect her fictional experience with different contributions to her underdetermined self. It is an interplay between fusion, what part of ourself already resonate with the character's self, and fissure, which part of ourself are not or not yet able to understand, endorse, perform, feel the character's mental states and actions. The positions of this interaction are not fixed, and thanks to sharing the co-present space of a character, we can become able to do, think, feel what previously was impossible or difficult to us. This is why I would suggest comparing this zone of fictional co-presence to Leo Vygotsky's concept of zone of proximal development. In the interaction, between a child and an adult, Vygotsky claimed there is always, and I quote, a distance between the actual development level of a child as determined by independent problem solving and the level of potential development as determined through problem solving under adult guidance or in collaboration with more capable peers, end quote. In other words, the cognitive capability of a child is always the sum of what it can already do, think, and feel, and what it could do, think, and feel if put in contact with an adult guidance or more capable peers. To apply this to our case, I want to suggest that similarly, both a reader and a fictional character have things that they can do, think, feel before entering in contact with each other. Yet, as soon as the reader enters the zone of fictional co-presence, both can unpredictably develop new cognitive capacities and complexities. To claim that characters can learn from readers might raise some high eyebrows, so let me hinge the claim a little. What I mean by this is that a character being an incomplete and underdetermined entity will develop as a fully fledged being in different ways according to different intersubjective encounters with readers in her zone of fictional co-presence. The working and existence of characters in a literary narrative in this sense resembles that of characters in movie scripts, since readers, as actors do, need to complement psychological and behavioral traits explicitly scripted with independent, sometimes idiosyncratic choices, which evolve as actors or readers come to know the character more. This getting acquainted with characters, rather than the solipsistic performance of an identifying task to get right, is an intersubjective trajectory, whereby characters come to life differently, or we might even say come to different lives, according to the different intersubjective developments in the co-presence and proximity with ghostly interpreters. So my adaptation of a model of immersivity, hopefully whatever you can see, with literary characters is now complete. And I hope I've given you an idea of how I see our fictional relation with characters as highly dynamic, intersubjective, and from the character's possible point of view on us, phantasmal. For a character, we are the virtual presences, metaleptic intruders or companions with actual effect in her world and on herself. These are the key tenets also of my view and parallel model of the metaleptic immersivity of characters in real life. And I'm taking a sip of water. So I've constructed the elements in my model of immersion in a way that can be easily reversed to explain immersivity and experiential crossing. To refresh your memory, the phenomenon of experiential crossing consists in readers feeling that characters are crossing the fictional world and stay with them outside the activity of reading, as felt and active presences in their lives, as emerged fictional characters, or EC, in the model. This is an anomalous phenomenon because once the experience of reading is over, characters should remain only part of their memories. Memories, no matter how vivid, have a different phenomenology from our feeling of the present moment, or what phenomenologists call our present time consciousness, or our nounness, to use Varela's formulation. As Francisco Varela elucidates, memories cannot even be equal to our feeling of what has just passed because, and I quote, in the present, I see what just passed. In memory, I can only hold it in a representation as if through a veil. Thus, memory and evocation have a mode of appearance that is qualitatively different from nounness. End quote. To grasp the difference, it might be helpful for you to think of the phenomenology of a déjà vu, where the opposite happens. The present moment is felt momentarily as a memory. In short, memories have a past time phenomenology, whereas the characters in experiential crossing are perceived as emerging into our present time phenomenological experience. In other words, they enter our zone of actual co-presence, coming into contact with what phenomenologists call our zone of actualization or sphere of ownness. In real-world cognition, the notion of co-presence has been originally coined to define the contemporaneous physical presence of others within our proximal space. However, the concept has been now extended as well to virtual presences and imaginary beings, or more in general, to any perceived situated interaction with other agents. My use of the term, even in the immersivity model, endorses this idea that co-presence is a perception. In the words of Campos Castillo Hitling, and I quote, the perception of a mutual entrainment between actors. This is why we should disentangle, as Zhao suggests, modes of co-presence, being the physical, virtual, or in my case, phantasmal, from the sense of co-presence, absent, feeble, strong, internal, external, ambiguous. When readers perceive characters entering the zone of actual co-presence, either as an almost tangible external togetherness or as a felt inner insideness, their phantasmal mode of presentification seems not to diminish the sense of an intersubjective intimacy. And as with different positions in immersivity, emerged togetherness and insideness pose different problems. From our data, the sense of an external presence of literary characters in their physical environment is less frequent. External togetherness is mostly associated with liminal moments either before or after dreaming. For instance, one of the readers reported that, and I quote, I've several times been woken up by a character speaking to me as if they are lying next to me, end quote. While many readers told us that a character makes his way or spills over into dreams, external togetherness in waking moments seems more rare. When it happens, as in the example above, the experience acquires a physical perceptual quality that links this type of immersivity to hallucinatory experiences of felt presence, such as reported, for instance, by Arctic explorers. A feeling of insideness of fictional characters crossing into the reader's mental life innerly seems to be the most common type of crossing. Importantly, however, this feeling never results in a total identification with the character. As in the immersion model, there seems rather to be different degrees of insideness resulting in different kinds of intersubjective relations. This means that, as with immersion, both togetherness and insideness are generating intersubjective exchanges within the reader's zone of actual co-presence. And even with immersivity, these interactions seem able to affect the reader's way of thinking, acting, or feeling. In short, the zone of actual co-presence with characters can be characterized also here as a zone of proximal development between the reader's zone of actualization and the character's emerged presence. Before showing you a few examples of different phantasmal interactions, a last theoretical problem remains to be addressed. How is it possible that our mind or zone of actualization can host another pseudo-human being? Intuitively, we would say that we, unlike fictional characters, don't have a thin ontology. We feel rather well-defined, fully fledged, and ontologically thick selves and beings. As far as it may seem counterintuitive or abstract, phenomenology and cognitive psychology suggest that instead that our subjective consciousness is structured around the void to be filled by the other. In Dan Zahavi's words, otherness is within us as a quality of consciousness, and our consciousness is open to intersubjectivity even in the absence of another physical presence, to the point that, and I quote, even if consciousness could turn its attention so completely toward itself that everything else were excluded, it would not escape the confrontation with otherness, end quote. As Natalie DePrance suggests, the structure of our self is inhabited by many inner splittings or inner openings that allow other presences to access, stay, and affect our cognitive life. This can be seen as the counterpart of empathy, since empathy, as Ivan Thompson explains, is a case of self-displacing or self-othering, whereas in immersivity we have otherness displaced within the self. However, phenomenology says self-transposal into other people's lives is made possible by the same gate and split structure that allows other presences to enter our cognitive life. On a similar vein, cognitive psychologists have suggested that after a child has engaged with caregivers in social interactions, she later internalizes the possibility of another person's perspective within the mind. This is what Charles Ferdinand has called an open slot, and in his view, this is the mental space and position whence our inner voice is talking to us, or about the world in inner speech. This last view seems a good candidate to explain why many readers reported characters as talking to them in their mind. The idea of an inner split or an open slot within ourselves, whereby otherness can become an insideness, was the last dowel needed in our model of immersivity. We might not be ontologically thin, but we are neither complete nor solipsistically fulfilled by our own presence. We need and allowed otherness to enter our mind, and in experiential crossing, this phenomenon acquires a particularly vivid phenomenology. So it is time to show you briefly just a few examples from our data to locate in the model. I have no time to give you a satisfying survey, so I will select 3 different degrees of phantasmal intersubjectivity and crossing from instances of emerged insideness. At the highest degree of proximity, readers reported sometimes to think or act through as a character's perspective or worldview. And I quote, "Some books will affect me so powerfully, I will think, talk, and even take on the mannerism of the main voices in the story." Or as another reader says, "For me, this generally only happens with a really strong first-person narrative. If the voice of a good book gets into my head, it can seep into my own experience of the world, and I find myself thinking in that voice as that character while carrying out normal activities." Other times, reader reported to actually hear characters commenting on their life in their mind. This can be seen as a middle type of inner proximity. Here we have a more clear distinction and intersubjective relation between the readers and the characters' selves. This type of immersivity is in line with the idea that crossing characters can occupy the open slot of our inner speech. And I quote, "My inner voice will make weary observation in the voice of Elizabeth Bennet. Characters become part of the running chatter and commentary inside my head." Another quote, "When I come back into the real world, I still hear the character's voice in my head, as if they are still there with me, a part of my life, contributing to what I'm experiencing. These voices often just offer a sort of commentary." And last example, after or during reading a book, I will often hear a character's voice inside my head. It's like an internal dialogue commenting on what's happening in the real world. Finally, sometimes characters, in spite of still surfacing as auditory presences in readers' minds, behave as more detached, autonomous, and pairing figures. And I quote, "There was a time when I was in a bad predicament and I did not know the best course of action to get out of the situation I was in, but then I heard a character's voice from a book I once read tell me what to do." And last quote, "Occasionally, a character's inner thought will spontaneously come to mind from the book I read previously, and I feel that character's warmth as I hear their voice. This usually happens when I'm mulling over a particular problem or dealing with something emotionally. It makes me feel cared for. This last kind of crossing is possibly the more fascinating, since it seems to assign an even stronger agency, presence, and independent autonomy to the emerged characters, a feeling so far only studied in a creative relation between writers and their characters. Moreover, given that here readers seem to get from characters support and advice about difficult real-life situations, this type of phantasmal intersubjectivity makes manifest in which sense our zone of actual co-presence with them can be considered also a zone of proximal development. To conclude, a study of immersivity, of characters' metaleptic immersivity should prompt us to ask not only, as Blake Vermeulen has successfully done in a homonymous book, why do we care for literary characters, but also why and how do literary characters care for us? Why and how do they enter our cognitive life? And what are the outcomes of these phantasmal interactions? I hope my tentative models will help investigate further these questions, also allowing to link characters' immersivity to less pleasant experiences such as auditory verbal hallucinations. In addition, I think that a theory of immersivity can help us refine on a more clear and concrete ground the often vague assumption that literature can affect, help, or change us in real life. Immersivity shows that literary narratives are not just providing, as some psychologists or philosophers of mind have suggested, protocols, scripts, and models for better understanding actions and minds in real life, or what Dan Hatto has called the narrative practice hypothesis. They are rather filling the structural void in ourselves with lively presences and intersubjective negotiations of meaning, sometimes with friendships that will last longer than their creators might have imagined. Thank you. I'm not sure what you're seeing now, but hopefully it's the last slide. Right.
Okay, here we are. Thank you so much, Marco. That was amazing. Such a rich contribution. And first of all, I want to reassure you we could hear you perfectly. And I mean, well, we couldn't probably read all the codes properly, but I mean, it was clear anyway. So thank you very much. And oh yeah, thank you. And also thank you for making me feel a lot healthier about my relationship with literary characters. Having said that, I'm going to open it to the floor. I mean, of course, I'm sure we all have a lot of questions and doubts and curiosities. I think I was just going to break the ice, even though, I mean, it might be something slightly slightly connected to what you were discussing, but I kept thinking of the famous quote by Salinger at the end of Catcher in the Rye about, you know, finishing a novel and then being able to call up the author and ask him questions. So I was wondering, in your experiment, if there was any confusion also between the status of literary characters and literary authors as well in the experiments that you guys ran. And
thanks, Antonio.
If you may in some way.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. It's thanks for everyone also to endure the virtuality. I would much rather be there and go to drink some Pichet wine later. But yes, the short answer is yes. And actually, in the published article on consciousness and cognition, we published the entire coding categories, and so it's the article is called Uncharted Features of Reading and was published in 2017. And there were actually many readers I wouldn't say confusing, but saying that the voice of the narrators was blending. This is what we call like external blending, because they were like blending the voice, the perceptual qualities, and what they knew about the authors with the narrator. And in the case, for example, of Salinger, that could have been like with the first person narrating character. So that is definitely like a navigation of how the voices and of the narrator and characters were perceived, were definitely showing what we call a blending between information from the external world about authors, and especially if and these also include blending with, for example, movies, movie adaptations of novels. So the kind of circulation of sensorily, and not just sensorily, there was a transmigration of elements. But I guess your question is also, which is a great question, is also leading to something that what I'm calling here immersivity, and I'm limiting this to fictional characters here, is broadly, hopefully would serve for broader questions about even like how we want to connect to authors as if they were the narrators of a novel instead of being separate narratological entities.
Absolutely, yeah. Also about exactly what you were saying about the kind of the overlap, and I guess the confusion between the author and the narrator of the novel, and the implied author, and so on and so forth. So, yes, thank you. And I'm not going to hold the space and time here, so I'm going to actually leave it to the floor. Maybe if you have questions for Marzia. Marzia, maybe you can join us. Actually, sorry, I was a bad chair there. For either Marzia or Marco, or both of them, considering that, I mean, the two talks actually touched upon very related topics and very related issues.
Can I follow up a question to Marco? Like, he's very much in the same line, actually. I was wondering again about the experiment that your contribution is based on. What kind of questions did you ask the readers to prompt? So I was curious to know how much you prompted them to give those such, I'm not saying biased answer, but like, since they were framing their engagement with characters in such a like embodied way. Do you think they were prompted a bit like by your question? What kind of, how, or better, how did you manage to ask the question without trying not to bias them, to give such embodied representations of characters?
That's a very legitimate question, and I won't enter into the detail about how coding works in psychology, but there is, again, in the article, in the published article, you find the reader questionnaires, or a link to the reader questionnaires and the questions we ask. But I think the shorter answer I can give is that that experimental empirical study was within a project, an interdisciplinary project on voice hearing, as Guido and knows very well. So if any questions was, we asked like more like general questions about what is called absorption scales, and general like traits about how readers about subjects are prone to imagine things, and in more general terms, those are kind of standard question in that kind of questionnaires. But the more specific questions were about voices, and were really quite open, but were mostly directed to understand what kind of phenomenological qualities the voices of characters had, and therefore it was even more surprising to find out these, what I call the experiential crossing, because it was entirely unrelated to what we were describing in a way.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
And ciao, Marzia, by the way. Good to see you.
Thanks to both speakers.
Can you hear the question, Marco?
No.
Can
you come to the?
Yeah. So where should I go?
Maybe just close enough to the camera.
Okay, so can you hear me now?
Oh, if you want to take the question later, report to me, Antonio. It's fine. Yes, yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, you hear it now. Yeah.
Okay, well, it's more of a remark.
Okay.
So thanks to both speakers, it was really fascinating to have these two cognitive perspectives. There will be a small follow-up in my talk, Professor. My remark is this double direction of immersion and immersion can already be found in ancient literature. But what I studied was rather the immersive idea, and you do find statements like in narrative saying, I feel like I'm part of the Trojan War when hearing the story. But it's had more common to it the other way around. In literary criticism, we find statements like putting something an author before the reader's eye. And this is very much like immersion. So I just found it very interesting to see that this double direction can be traced back so long. It's very nice that also so fruitful for the theory. Just a remark.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Anyone else wants to say? Oh, sorry. Maybe you wanted to comment on that, Marco?
No. It was just a very nice comment, and I'd be very happy for other people to pick up in a trans-historical, long period reflection about ancient literature as well. That would be great.
Absolutely, and we'll hear more about that tomorrow, I believe. Yes. Any other question? Again, English, Italian, French, German? No.
Italian. Vediamo un po', mi metto vicino a Marzia. Marco, mi senti?
Benissimo.
Senti, io ho una domanda che in realtà è più una curiosità. Mi dispiace che tu non sia qui fisicamente, ovviamente perché sarebbe bello passare del tempo insieme a Parigi, ma anche perché hai sollevato delle questioni apparentemente tecniche, ma che in realtà riecheggiano una serie di tematiche e di problemi con cui ci si confronta in realtà anche al di fuori della letteratura, cosa che si capiva molto dall'exposé che hai fatto. E per l'appunto volevo tornare su uno degli aspetti che hai affrontato, che hanno a che fare con il rapporto alla scrittura. Tu hai evocato queste situazioni in cui ci sono degli autori che parlano delle voci dei personaggi di cui scrivono e che finiscono per sentire queste voci, a volte anche lasciarsi guidare, lasciarsi orientare da queste voci. Per tanto tempo io mi sono detto che alcune delle considerazioni che gli autori fanno sulle voci che sentono avrebbero anche potuto rinviare a una forma di postura, non dico intellettuale, però estetica in senso lato, no? Poi una volta leggendo Primo Levi e gli avantesti di Se non ora quando, in cui lui tenta di riattualizzare un dispositivo testimoniale in seno ad un'opera di finzione per parlare del contesto resistenziale degli ebrei d'Europa orientale, ha utilizzato appunto questa espressione delle voci che immediatamente mi è sembrata più concreta. E mi domando, c'è una differenza nel tipo di indagini che hai svolto tu in ambito narratologico tra le modalità attraverso cui si esprime questa dialettica che si può instaurare con le voci che si sentono, che si racconta di sentire? C'è una differenza tra quando si tratta di finzione in senso vero e proprio e quando invece si tratta per esempio di narrativizzazione, di finzionalizzazione della storia, ma a partire da qualcosa che è ancorata in un tipo di universo anche documentario e fattuale comprovabile. Ovvero, il modo in cui si articola il rapporto alle voci che si sentono cambia quando sul piano esperienziale ciò a cui si fa riferimento è diverso, oppure questo tipo di considerazioni che tu hai passato in rassegna e che sono effettivamente molteplici hanno solo denominatori comuni.
That's should I English, I guess, is the lingua franca we are going with.
Sì, yes. Puoi rispondere anche nella lingua, soprattutto in cui hai l'abitudine di parlare di queste cose e in cui...
Yes, I think English is probably the answer. It's a great question, Guido, and I definitely, the short answer would be absolutely. I think there is a lot to be explored further. It's a question that if I got the question right, you can certainly, so in a way, the study empirical studies about like writers and characters are been discovering what has been now is quite widely known as what is called the illusion of independent agency, the idea that writers are actually experiencing at some point characters taking up a life of their own, independent, with wills, desires, and autonomy. And there are beautiful studies on this, and the studies have been replicated. So this kind of like taking up of agency that goes beyond what you know or you were intending to do or write about. I think that's certainly something that should not be limited to the creation of fictional universes, but can certainly be analyzed also in a hybrid cases of, for example, autofiction or in your case, Guido, the fictionalization of history. It's I mean, the kind of work I know you do, like the analysis of how you construct a fictional witness to let history play itself almost with an autonomy in order to understand. Is an epistemological outcome, I guess, of this kind of taking up of agency of characters. Hopefully I'm going in the direction you were pointing me to, but I think one closing point I could say, so yes, I think there is more communality, there's more continuum than distinction, and in not to sell my book on Beckett, but it's because the author is the author I know better. If you in the book, I'm talking about what I'm calling introspection by simulation, the idea that authors might be introspecting themselves by creating a simulated version of themselves, and when there is a loop between this kind of introspective simulation by creating fictional universe, and now the simulation then plays upon yourself back to you. And in Beckett's letters, you see a lot of areas where he's actually basically starting to interpret himself through the lenses of his fictional characters, which are also a hybrid of what he thinks and believes in life or struggles with in life. So I'll stop here, but certainly autofiction, hybrid documentary forms, such even in cinema, I'm thinking about my Winnipeg, which we saw together with mixing archive materials and real and fake archive materials. So clearly, so far I've described an ontological hypothesis of permeability between fiction and imagination and reality. I think that could be extended to epistemological questions. Was that okay?
Sì, grazie.
Okay.
I wonder if we can draw a line between what you were just saying about the independent agency of characters and what Marzia was also saying about the need for interaction between the reader and the work and the novel, or the characters, in order to make sense of the story. So I guess if this doesn't go into the direction of taking agency away from the author, so to speak, taking agency away from the author and the narrator, giving it to the reader and the character to a certain extent. I don't know if that it's a bit of a half-baked remark, I'm afraid, but it's I just thought I would follow up on what you guys were saying. So I wonder what Marzia think about it, and then I have another curiosity question.
Okay. In the case of Calvino, if we approach the question generally, like, we consider like a broader range of text and fictions, like interactive video games and stuff, that's going in a totally different direction. But there, I think that the inaction and the agency of the reader or the recipients like enters in very different ways. In the case of Calvino, no, I wouldn't. I think that by saying that we reenact the text, or that the reader acts in a sense or manipulates, I think it's more, it tells, I wanted to refer more, I'm not saying that I'm using it metaphorically, but I'm saying that, well, also metaphorically, but it has to do with, okay, I'm starting again. I think that in the case of Calvino, it's Calvino that is enacting, is representing a way of imagining that is very manipulative, in the sense that it can be conceptualized very much in terms of manipulation. And that by staging a text that foregrounds this manipulation so blatantly, it somehow is self-reflective of what readers do, less agent, with way less agency. So no, I would think that talking about the text as having an active approach to the text gives the agency to the reader. So this would be like my short answer. But of course, I think that the inactive approach is interesting in as much as it allows to create continuities between different types of text. That might be so. It gives tools to approach the text that might create a continuum between text where the agency of the recipient is limited, like read like books, and text instead that are way more interactive, like video games or interactive narratives. So perhaps by framing it in this way, you can create a better dialogue between different types of text, where agency is different, like it has different degrees of agency for the readers.
Thank you, Martin. Anyone else?
I have a question for Marcia, if I may. In English, so that I don't force anyone to translate. But my question, Marcia, was a great talk. I thought about like my question is about fictional worlds and world building, and the question is that both Calvino, whom I know you love very much, and the text Maria Polvin is talking about, science fiction text, actually very much a lot about world building, but paradoxically, the inactivists, I don't know how much you know about the polemics around the very notion of worlds, and should we talk about fictional worlds? And Marco Caracciolo and others have been actually targeting the notion of world, saying there is not a world, is only the inaction of in blind. Marco talks about the blind reader, like there is no world, we are like blind readers with a cane, building on Merleau-Ponty. And whereas and Rita Walsh as well has criticized the notion of worlds, whereas Mary O'Ryan is defending the notion of worlds. And since both Calvino and the text Mary is talking about are a lot about world building, so my question is about how do you feel? Because to me, I completely see your point about increasing immersivity in the kind of text you're talking about. But to me, that kind of immersivity, if I introspect as a reader, feels like the pleasure of world building together with the author. If you take away the notion of worlds, to me that would be difficult to do you see?
Yeah.
My question, yeah.
This is no, I agree with I agree with you. So I think I would still talk about a story world. Just I would say that story world includes aspects that have very much to do with form and not just with the represented, with what we would say like we call the mimetic content. But I agree that I still have troubles like really going the radical inactive way that, as you say, like might get rid of the notion of world. So I have no quarrels with you there. I still think that we tend to engage with, when we read a text, we don't forget that the world, the imagined world we are building in our mind and playing with, it's something separate from reality. It has its own a reality of its own. It is a world of its own. So I wouldn't get rid with the notion of world or story world, however you would call it. Yeah.
Thanks. If I may, a brief follow-up question about the needs of. Do you think would you be interested in testing empirically your claim about Calvino? Because in a way, it made me think about how it is more like I'm asking you a very anecdotal opinion in a way, because as a reader of Beckett, I always thought that everyone would have loved Beckett, and then I discovered that not very much people are actually loving and feeling immersed by, especially his narrative work, which is the one I love the most. So Calvino and the science fiction text Mary is talking about, I feel like since they are doing a lot of things, including metaleptic violations, I think, do you think that they would they kind of like call for a specific kind of reader? And if so, maybe empirically testing your claim, if it's true for only 5% of readers, that might be, you see my point? I had my own pain with Beckett, yeah.
I think it would be very interesting. I think it would be hard to quantify or like to qualify the sort of background that each reader has, so that we can see whether it's a matter of loving Calvino, so you go along with whatever he proposes, or it's a matter of being acquainted with like text of a certain complexity, or with a play in a metafictional way to a higher degree. I think it would be very interesting, and actually would take away some doubts about, is it just me like seeing all these things, and as you see, like as you say about Beckett. So I don't know, like it's very hard to engage with these kind of empirical studies, which in the end, like I think sometimes, well, yours are different because they are psychological experiments, like, but I don't know, it's very hard to make an experiment that is as complex as the claims you want to test. Sometimes you end up like, it would be very cool to design such an experiment. Yeah.
Thanks, Martin.
Okay, so if there are no more questions, I want to ask you to join me in thanking our amazing speakers again for such a rich and lively conversation. And then...
Thanks, Antonio. Thanks, Guido.
I think, I don't know if the organizers want to say anything, give any information about the rest of the conference.
Practical information.
Practical information, maybe.
Se parlo italiano capiscono tutti. Non, si, bon, je vais les donner en français du coup, qui est la langue de la fac et de la ville. Donc, pour ce soir, on a pensé vous convier un petit verre avant de vous quitter, si vous en avez le temps et l'envie. Il fait encore beau et donc on peut se poser dehors et poursuivre les échanges à l'extérieur. Pour demain, donc le rendez-vous, si je me souviens bien, c'est à 9h, en sachant qu'on aura un temps de battement justement, donc ne vous inquiétez pas trop si vous n'êtes pas là à 9h pile.
Je crois que c'est 9h30.
9h30 oui. Bon, mais ça vaut le même discours. Hein. C'est-à-dire que voilà, on aura un petit temps de battement le matin. D'autant plus qu'il faudra installer de nouveau des choses pour que la salle soit prête, étant donné qu'en ce moment, il y a moins de personnes que d'habitude dans les universités.